Chapter 1033. Roland was not surprised by the strong reaction and sensation caused by the magic movie. In fact, on the night of the filming, he, as the producer and one of the first audience members, was also shocked when he watched this pioneering work in the castle hall. The visual impact of the virtual illusion could not be described in a few words. Now that he thought about it, he did not have such a strong feeling in the reflection church in the old holy city. It was because most of the meetings and celebrations recorded in the sigil were static images. Although it was very novel, it had limited stimulation to the senses. But once it was changed to a dynamic recording, it would be extremely realistic. For example, when falling from a high altitude, the brain would still be deceived by the eyes even though it was fake. Even Roland felt this way, not to mention the general public, whose level of appreciation was still at the stage. The success of the magic movie was already within his expectations. However, there were some things that exceeded Roland's expectations. That was, the effects of the magic shadow were a little too good. In the third and fifth performances, the audience fled and fainted. The former almost caused a stampede, while the latter was rushed to the hospital. If it were not for Nana, he would probably have been killed. And all of the above happened before Echo's song started. Obviously, the bird's eye view at the beginning and the awakening of the elder princess into a wolf were the areas with the highest incidence of problems. Moreover, this was a high-priced theater designed for the rich, so the audience was much more knowledgeable and receptive than the general public. If it was the fair-price theater a week later, the situation would be even worse. Realizing this, Roland had no choice but to revise his broadcast plan. Originally, he wanted to increase the number of people by changing the seats. For example, if he replaced the reclining chairs in the high-priced theater with benches, the number of audience would immediately double. This was also the reason why the fair-price theater did not allow people to bring their own food and drinks. However, if he wanted to prevent people from stampeding, benches that could fall with a push were obviously not suitable. In the end, he replaced them with iron benches that could be fixed to the ground, and required the audience to wear belts to prevent disasters. In addition, he also restricted the audience's age and physical condition. People over 45, or people with a history of acrophobia or palpitations were not allowed to watch The Wolf Princess. After all, magic movies were new to him. Whether it was the design of the new theater or the rules for watching the movie, he had to start from scratch. Due to the popularity of the magic movie, the trinkets that were given as gifts also attracted the attention of many people. In the past few days, the City Hall had received more than a dozen trade applications from merchants. All of them had come for the popcorn and milk bags, hoping to win a monopoly. However, after listening to Barov's report, Roland rejected all of their requests. After all, puffy foods like popcorn were difficult to preserve, and there was no technical difficulty in making them. It was not profitable to supply the corn by himself, and it was easy to imitate the technology provided by the partnership. Besides, Neverwinter was not the main corn producer, so he did not have any advantage in the competition. Therefore, it was better to hold it in his hands and use it as a sweetener to attract foreign people. As for the packaging, there wasn't enough left to sell. It was one of the first products of the rubber worm breeding industry. After nearly a year of breeding, these worms had basically settled down in the third border city, and the ancient witches' research on them had made considerable progress. Ever since they discovered that by adjusting the ratio of the worm's mucus and organ secretions, they could obtain different kinds of colloids with different degrees of flexibility, the research quickly became clear. It became a sideline for the tequila survivors to synthesize different kinds of samples and then test their corrosion resistance and wear resistance. The liquid packaging and the straw came from this sideline. Making these two things was not just a whim. They were also very important to the Army's logistical support. Whether it was to hold food or disinfectant, soft plastic bags could be of great use. Not to mention, compared to metal or glass containers, the cost of making them was much lower. Apart from insects, almost no additional resources were consumed. Although the third border city had dug several new caves for the breeding of rubberworms, and the number of rubberworms had increased from 100 to nearly 1,000, it was still far from enough to meet the needs of the war. Therefore, it was foreseeable that the rubber worms would be one of Neverwinter's strategic resources for a long time. On the 4th day after the release of the magic movie, Roland received news that Edith, the Pearl of the Northern Region, had returned to Neverwinter with Olivia. He met the woman he had met once before in the castle's reception hall again. She looked a little nervous, but she did not avoid his gaze. There was a vague sense of resignation in her eyes. Different from their last encounter at night, in the well-lit hall, Roland could see her more clearly. Her delicate facial features and slim body made her look like a weather-beaten flower. The fatigue and weakness caused by the long voyage made her look even more delicate. However, her inner unyieldingness supported her and prevented her from really collapsing. This kind of contrast added a layer of beauty to her, causing others to either be unable to help but want to protect her or want to possess and destroy her. If she fell into the hands of other lords, there would be only one of these two outcomes. She seemed to be prepared for such a fate. Roland could not help laughing. Although the circle of nobles in this era was indeed chaotic, he had no such thoughts. "Don't worry," Roland said pleasantly. "It's much warmer here than in Coldwind Ridge. No one will disturb your life here. You'll like this city after a while." "Yes, Your Majesty." She hesitated for a moment and then lowered her head. "Then you can go and have a rest. Someone will arrange a room for you," Roland said. After Olivia was taken away by the guards, Edith did a curtsy and said, "That's all? I thought you'd talk to her more and get to know her better." "You've said everything you wanted to say. I have nothing else to add." Roland shrugged and pretended that he did not understand the meaning of the word love. "How was the trip? Did it go well?" "Of course. She's very decisive when it comes to her child," Edith replied. "It took longer than expected to clean up the mess, but those people won't give you any more trouble." "Good job." He nodded. "It was the right choice to let you handle it." "Thank you, Your Majesty," the Pearl of the Northern Region said with a smile. "There's one more thing I need to report. On my way back, I received a message from an engineering team. Azima didn't find the glory of the sun in the eastern region, so she's heading north." "So, that line came from the other side of the swirling sea." Roland frowned slightly. If the line could only go north, it would be fine if it was in Grey Castle, but it would be difficult if it was in other kingdoms. "I see." Roland quickly recovered his composure. "You can go and have a rest." "Yes." When she reached the door, Edith suddenly turned around and said, "You too. Your Majesty, please take care of yourself." Roland looked at her in surprise. Chapter 1034. "That girl is too presumptuous," Nightingale said discontentedly as she emerged from the mist. "What does she mean by that?" Indeed, ever since he had talked to the Pearl of the Northern Region about how Iron Axe dealt with the nobles, her attitude had changed slightly. She seemed to have let go of herself. Although for Roland, this was not a bad thing. He thought for a moment. "Can you tell if she's telling the truth?" "It's true." Nightingale curled her lips. "At least she didn't lie about wanting you to take care of your body. Otherwise, I would have taken control of her and interrogated her." "In that case, let her be." Roland laughed. "If I have to guess everyone's thoughts, it'll be too tiring. I don't have that much energy." Nightingale, who had been indignant, suddenly froze. Then she pretended to look away and said, You're right. I only have to worry about 1 or 2 people." You're so good at hiding it. You're really showing your thoughts on your face." Roland tried his best not to smile. He cleared his throat and said, "Then let's go back to the office. There's a lot of work to be done. For example, putting into use the 2 internal combustion engines that had passed the prototype test. Having a power source was only the first step. How to mass-produce them and manufacture the corresponding mechanical equipment were all difficult problems. In addition, there was also the design and assembly of armored trains, the production of biocolloids, and the expansion of more factories and armies. However, compared to another thing, he could put these work aside for a while. Although it did not have much significance, it was necessary to gather the people's support. The moment Olivia arrived in Neverwinter, It meant that all the conditions for the coronation were in place. A week later, the castle district of Neverwinter was opened to the public for the first time. Under the guidance of the police and guards, thousands of screened people gathered in the courtyard, excitedly waiting for the coronation of the new king. Outside the castle district, the streets were decorated with lanterns and streamers. Even the sporadic snowflakes in the sky could not dampen the enthusiasm of the people for the celebration. For this grand ceremony, the Lord's castle was also temporarily remodeled. The outer wall of the vestibule was removed and replaced with a fence that did not obstruct the view, and the yard was removed and replaced with a flat lawn. As long as he ascended the long slope to the castle area, he would be able to have a panoramic view of the entire ceremony. Both sides of the castle were hung with red banners with black edges. The banners hung from the roof all the way to the ground. The color combination was particularly eye-catching in the snow-covered background, and it also added a sense of gravity to the not-so-grand castle. The biggest change came from the second floor of the castle. It was as if overnight, a diagonal support had been built on the bare facade, causing a half-empty balcony to appear on the second floor. The front of the terrace faced the vestibule gate, where the king would undoubtedly receive the blessings of his subjects. Only the designer, Minister Carr, knew that the platform structure, which was completed quickly, was created by the witches. After Ms. Agatha extended the ice wall on the castle wall, Ms. Soroya drew a bricklayer, and it became a part of the castle that was indistinguishable from the real one. In such weather, the thick ice wall could last for a few days. At this moment, there was another scene in the castle. "Your Majesty, are you ready?" Vendi's voice came from outside the bedroom. "All the ministers and guests have arrived, and we're just waiting for you." "I see. I'll be ready in a minute." Roland responded and turned to look at the girl in a pure white dress. "What do you think?" "Wait a minute. I'm still a little nervous." The girl was Anna. She stood in front of the window and looked down at the noisy crowd through the curtain. Her blue eyes were obviously rippling. "Do you really want to go on the stage with me?" The ceremonial officer said that such a thing has never happened in previous coronations. She was not as fearless as he thought. Roland realized that although Anna had always been smiling at him, when the moment really came, she would still be worried and confused. Her excellence in learning and love for new knowledge made her full of confidence most of the time. When she devoted herself to creation and manufacturing, she shone like a genius. But apart from these halos, she was just a girl in her early 20s who grew up in a remote village. Now that she was about to face the eyes of tens of thousands of people, it was impossible for her not to be nervous. Thinking of this, Roland smiled and said in the softest voice, "Then I'll be the first person to make an exception. Or, do you want me to crown myself alone?" "Of course not," Anna shook her head. Roland walked up to her and hugged her. "Then I'll put it another way." "Put it another way?" "Well." He took a breath and pretended to be serious. "Miss Anna, I want to hire you as my wife. Are you willing?" Anna could not help but laugh. "No way. I'm not a prisoner in a cage now, and what? The engagement time is too short." She hammered Roland's shoulder hard and then reached out her right hand, which was wearing a white veil. "Thank you, Roland. Take me down." Roland held her palm firmly. Opening the door, they slowly walked through the corridor, went down the stairs, and entered the hall on the first floor. The noisy hall immediately quieted down. Everyone stood in 2 rows and slightly bowed their heads, welcoming Roland's arrival. He walked along the line. On the left were the witches of Neverwinter. He saw Tilly, Ashes, Nightingale, Vendi, Lightning, Agatha. One by one, familiar faces came into view. Compared to the refugees who had nowhere to go 3 years ago, they had now reintegrated into the new social order and gradually became an inseparable part of the human kingdom. On the right were the officials of City Hall and representatives from various places, such as Barav, Edith, Iron Axe, Carr, Kyle, Theo, Yorko, and so on. Together, they formed the power structure of the Kingdom of Grey Castle. They had turned from ordinary people into rising political stars. According to tradition, The coronation was an extremely complicated process. However, for the witches and the officials of Neverwinter, Roland's throne had long been established, so the process was greatly simplified. He took Anna's hand and walked to the center of the hall. There was a stone table there, on which stood 2 golden crowns. The Church of Wimbledon III and Hermes no longer existed. He declined the ceremonial officer's request and decided to wear the crowns together with Anna. It was unprecedented for Greycastle to have a coronation and a queen at the same time. Of course, the ceremonial officer expressed his objection, but it was not binding on Roland, who held great power. Unexpectedly, Berev also stood on Roland's side. Roland bent down and let Anna put the crown on his head. Then he gently put the other crown on her head. When the 2 of them turned around, everyone knelt down on one knee in unison. Long live the king! Amid the cheers of the crowd, Roland held Anna's hand and walked step by step toward the staircase at one end of the hall. They passed through the overhead dome and went up to the castle's balcony. Suddenly, there was a raging wave under the courtyard. Before he raised his hand to signal, the crowd, who had been waiting for a long time, had already expressed their respect. Long live His Majesty! Long live the king! Long live the city of Neverwinter! The deafening cheers went straight to the sky. The crowd seemed to be in an uproar. Ribbons and petals fell from the balcony and danced with the cold wind. For a moment, the momentum of the snow and ice was overshadowed. Chapter 1035. At the same time. The City of Glow. Hearing the noon bell, Horford Quinn put down the quill in his hand and looked to the southwest. The news of Wimbledon's coronation had not only spread throughout Greycastle, but also a large number of propagandists in the Kingdom of Dawn. According to the leaflet, if there were no accidents, this was the time for the young man's coronation. It was too fast. Horford could not help sighing. He was a few years younger than his daughter, Andrea, but now he was the indisputable king of the kingdom. His influence had even crossed the border. Since the battle with the Moya family, some nobles in the king's city of the Kingdom of Dawn might not know the real name of Wimbledon III, but few people did not know the name Roland Wimbledon. At first, it was only circulated in the underground Chamber of Commerce. Later, anecdotes about this prince spread through various channels, like wildfires sweeping across the grassland. 3 years ago, he was just a lord of a remote town and the least favored of all the members of the Wimbledon royal family. Such a rapid rise was like a fantasy. It was not an exaggeration to call him a monster. Many of his actions were unfathomable like a monster. Take this coronation ceremony for example. Since ancient times, he was probably the only one who chose to hold a coronation ceremony in the winter when the months of demons were wreaking havoc. Usually, a king like this would only appear in times of turmoil or chaos. Thinking of the inside story of the Battle of Divine Will, he faintly felt that this world might usher in an earth-shaking upheaval. Your Majesty, the guard interrupted his contemplation. Sir Hillfox sent a letter. Horford withdrew his gaze. Open it and read it to me. Yes. Your Majesty was indeed an intoxicating title. He had been the hand of the king for nearly 20 years and had called him, Your Majesty, countless times. He had long thought that he had developed a resistance to it, but when someone called him that, he could still feel something swelling in his heart. Then I'll give my blessing to the King of Greycastle. Horford knew very well that the reason he was able to sit in this position and make the other restless people back off was because he had the support of the neighboring countries. Those aristocratic families were not afraid of the sword and saber in the hands of Knight Quinn, but they were full of fear towards the world-destroying thunder. In this time of great change, tying the fate of the family to the war chariot of Greycastle was the safest way. According to the letter, a mining team from Greycastle has entered the border of the Kingdom of Dawn. They hope to receive your assistance and support. Inform Earl Luashi of this matter and let him lead the knight group to welcome them, Horford quickly ordered. You also take my verbal order to inform all the lords on the way to provide all the necessary help to this team. Yes, Your Majesty. Archduke Island, Wolfheart Sea. Although this place was far away from the area affected by the months of demons, the passing wet and cold sea breeze still made the town appear bleak. Few people walked on the muddy streets, and only the dock area barely maintained some vitality. Therefore, an open-air wine shop set up next to the warehouse at the dock was particularly eye-catching. It mainly provided extremely cheap warm wine for sailors. Compared to the taverns that could shelter them from the wind and rain, passers-by generally just wanted to drink and dispel the chill in their stomachs. Very few people would stay after drinking, but at this moment, nearly 100 people gathered in front of the wine shop. It also attracted the attention of a woman in coarse clothes. "Farina?" Someone whispered, "What are you looking at? We should go." "Demons," she replied. "What?" The latter's expression changed. "I heard someone mention demons," the woman called Farina repeated. "Wait a moment, Joe." The man hesitated for a moment, but finally lowered his head and replied in a very low voice, "Yes. Your Majesty." "This is not an order." Farina waved her hand indifferently and then moved a few steps closer to the crowd, hoping to hear more clearly. "I've never seen such terrible monsters. They have wings longer than humans and fangs as thick as arms. The city wall is nothing to them." The source of the voice seemed to be a sea merchant. The feeling of being surrounded by the crowd made him particularly proud, and his voice became louder and louder. "But this is not the most terrible thing. There is another kind of demon sitting on those demons. They look like humans but much stronger than humans. The spears they throw seem to have eyes, fast and fierce, and even armor can't stop them. I'm not afraid of being laughed at, but I almost wet my pants at that time." Gasps could be heard from the crowd. "Are you serious? Doesn't that mean they are invincible? If they only stay in the sky, they can't touch them at all." There was also a small group of people who expressed disdain. "You're just bluffing. Demons? Can you tell the difference between demonic beasts and demons? That's right. Go to the Hermes Plateau. There are all kinds of monsters there. I'm afraid that you will wet your pants so easily. Don't freeze your little brother." "Ah, you know nothing," the sea merchant shouted. "That's the name given by His Highness Roland Wimbledon. He has been in the western region for many years. How can he not know the difference between demonic beasts and demons? In my opinion, demonic beasts are a group of disorderly refugees, while demons are a well-trained army. Have you ever seen those beasts attack the city in batches and focus on different areas? If what you said is true, how could Grey Castle withstand it? You don't understand." It was indeed very dangerous at that time, but there was a flash of fire and lightning on the city wall, just like a raining hail. He spat. The demons exploded in the sky in the blink of an eye. Flesh and blood splattered everywhere. One even fell in front of the hotel I temporarily stayed. The big hole in its chest was almost the size of a bowl. God knows how they did it. Even a bed crossbow can't have such power. According to what you said, the prince's strength is no different from that of God? Otherwise, how do you think he killed the church? Hearing this, Farina suddenly clenched her fists. Joe pressed down on her shoulder and shook his head at her silently. "I know." She took a deep breath and let go of his hand. "What do you think about this? The bloody moon hasn't appeared yet, so it's impossible for demons to appear in the barbarian land. However, his description of demons is similar to the records in the Holy Bible. It doesn't seem to be fabricated, so I can't tell." Joe paused and looked a little worried. "However, these are all related to us, unrelated." Farina interrupted. "You're right, Joe. We have to solve our own problems first." After the death of acting Pope Tucker Tolden, she followed his will and evacuated the new holy city with the rest of the Judgment Army, intending to rebuild the church on Archduke Island in the Kingdom of Wolfheart. Archduke Island used to be the stronghold of the witch organization, the Blood Fong Association. After it was destroyed by the army of the church, the holy city stationed people there to prevent the witches from making a comeback. Archduke Island was an ideal place to settle down. However, they did not expect that the news of the holy city's destruction would spread faster than their footsteps. After learning that Hermes had fallen, the bishop of the Archduke Island no longer recognized the identity given by the church. He turned around and mixed with the nobles, becoming the Count of the Archduke Island. He even hanged the first messenger outside the city. This incredible betrayal dealt a heavy blow to the Judgment Army. After that, many people left the team. Now that they had been in Archduke Island for half a year, they could only hide like rats on the street. If they could not raise the church flag and reunite the people, she was afraid that the church would be completely destroyed in her hands. There was no doubt that the only way to save the precarious situation was to sacrifice the traitor. The difficulty was that the enemy also had a team of Scourge. This battle was bound to be extremely tragic. Let's go. Farina pulled up her hood and looked at the wine shop for the last time. The sea merchant was still talking. There are many interesting things there. For example, the black iron ship as big as a hill, the giant building taller than the Tower of Babel. As long as you go there once, you'll never forget it. Tell me all about it. I'll add more wine for you. Are these all the works of Prince Roland? Hey, of course, but you can't call him Prince anymore. When I left Neverwinter, he had decided to officially ascend the throne. As for the date, let me think. It should be today. Oh? So he's the king of Grey Castle now? Huh, that's a good title. The sea merchant raised his glass full of wine. Since it's such a coincidence, let me propose a toast to the faraway king of Grey Castle. A toast to the king of Grey Castle. Everyone cheered and raised their glasses. The king of Grey Castle? Farina sneered. You can continue to build your seemingly prosperous kingdom in the ravine. When the battle of divine will comes, this world will eventually become a ruin. Sooner or later, we'll meet again in the real hell. The only difference is who comes first and who comes last. If I can't defeat the traitor this time, I'll leave first, but if I win, I'll wait here quietly for the news of you falling into hell. Chapter 1036. At the source of the silver stream in the sand sea of the southernmost region, Brian was sitting in his tent, waiting for news from the front line. In front of him were Gwel's Burnflame, the chief of the Wildflame clan, and Thurum, the elder of the Osha clan. The two of them had now become the representatives of the Majin clan. Together with the commander of the gun battalion, who represented the great chief, all the leaders of the Sand Nation had gathered here. The cold wind in the desert made the tent flap noisily, but the inside of the tent was unusually warm. It was as if they were sitting on a huge brazier. No matter how cold it was on the surface, they could always feel the hot air gushing out when they put their feet in the salt sand. The effect was comparable to the firebeds and heaters in Neverwinter. The locals even invented something called a sand bed. They dug a shallow pit in the ground that was as wide as a person and replaced the white salt sand with fine sand that had been sieved. Then, they buried themselves in the sand to maintain their body temperature to the greatest extent possible. The fine sand was soft to the touch and even more comfortable than a linen quilt. If one could pitch a tent above one's head, one could spend the whole winter comfortably. Unfortunately, it was this geothermal heat that destroyed the vitality of this place. The salt in the seawater constantly seeped out, turning the desert of about 100 kilometers into a snowy white. Not to mention flowers and trees, even sandworms and poisonous scorpions were hard to see. Without an oasis, there was no source of food. Such a large plain was no different from a dead land. In terms of desolation, perhaps only the Blackwater Swamp was more desolate than the southernmost region. For hundreds of years, the Majin people had only built a few scattered wooden houses at the border of the saline alkali land to provide temporary shelter for those who came from afar to collect salt. But now, the situation had changed. You're very calm, young man. Gwel suddenly broke the silence. The Wildwave clan and the Cutbone clan are both the most powerful clans in Iron Sand City. The great chief can easily defeat them, but it doesn't mean that those small tribes can do the same. Why are you so confident in them? Seeing that someone had started the conversation, Thurum hurriedly added, in the past year, no new tribe in Iron Sand City has been promoted to become one of the 6 major clans. Obviously, they control all the resources flowing into the city. But in the southernmost region, as long as there's enough food, the clans can quickly recover. I'm afraid they're even stronger than before you came here. Confidence? Brian shook his head slowly. I don't have such feelings for them. Then, why didn't you mobilize the great chief's troops? Thuram was a little surprised. We only need to dispatch 100 people. Together with the brave warriors of Wildflame and Osha, we'll definitely be able to stop these arrogant people from crossing the small oasis. And then? Let the first army patrol the Silverstream oasis forever and act as the guardians of those small tribes? Brian looked at him. Do you think that's what His Majesty wants to see? This. Thuram was at a loss for words. Soon after the Great Relocation Plan was implemented, the development of the southernmost region was also initiated. In addition to the construction of the festive harbor at the Endless Cape, another focus was the saline alkali land at the source of the Silver Stream. Due to the lack of river channels, if they wanted to transport these shining white industrial resources out of the desert, they could only rely on a large amount of manpower and animal power to tow carts to the nearest tributary of the Redwater River. For this reason, the two cities of Fallen Dragon Ridge and Port of Clearwater offered generous conditions in order to attract enough sand people to join the sand-moving army. In just 1 year, there were many tents and people coming and going at the junction of the saline alkali land. Deep wells were dug one after another, and fresh water was drawn from the underground river of the Silver Stream, which was used to filter and purify the salt sand. Simple factories were also built. There was no gushing steam or roar of machines. Everything was done by the hands of people. The whole process was like gold panning. People gathered the wealth scattered among the millions of gravel and crystallized it into blocks. Then they loaded it into trucks and transported it to the hinterland of the western region, waiting for further processing. This repetitive and boring work became the new rhythm of the saline alkali land. Although there was still no oasis, sandworms, or poisonous scorpions, the place gradually became lively. The reward of not worrying about food and clothing attracted not only the migrants but also the small tribes who had not made up their minds. They often came to the junction in groups, exchanging their physical strength for wheat, dried meat, and cloth. Some of them happily returned to the oasis with food, while others stayed and became one of the migrants. This phenomenon aroused the dissatisfaction of the big clans in Iron Sand City. The more tribes that left the oasis, the less resources they could get. The conflict finally broke out 2 months ago. The Wildwave and Cutbone clans dispatched their cavalry to kill a group of people from a small tribe that had set out from the oasis and threw their heads on the road to the north. Obviously, they intended to warn other sand people of the Majin Kingdom who were ready to make trouble. The big clans did not dare to make an enemy of the King of Grey Castle, so they aimed their butcher knives at the small tribes that had not yet surrendered. They might have thought that this would avoid the wrath of Thunder, the great chief. After all, no king of the Northern Kingdom would really care about the lives of hundreds of sand people. However, they did not expect that this move would directly touch the nerve of Neverwinter. Reducing the population for no reason was undoubtedly one of His Majesty's biggest taboos. Brian was well aware of this. Before Gwell's letter arrived, the firearm battalion commander had already prepared to deal with it. What if they fail? Gwell's Burnfire rubbed his forehead. If I remember correctly, it has only been 3 months since they started training with firearms, right? Then they'll be killed and their tribes will become slaves of Iron Sand City. Brian closed his eyes. Before we set out, I said that this battle is not for me, but for themselves. I've given them sharp weapons that can fight against the Iron Cavalry. If they still can't protect their tribes from the butcher knives of the enemy, then they don't deserve to be part of the army of Grey Castle. For me, it's just training a new group of people. Gwells looked at Brian seriously for the first time, as if he had a new understanding of this young officer. Moreover, you've forgotten that 3 months is only the time for firearms training. He continued, in addition to firearms, they also have knives, daggers, fists, and teeth. These weapons have been trained since the moment the Sand People were born, haven't they? The members of the Sand Nation army that Brian had selected were all from the small tribes that were stationed here. They were different from large clans like Wildflame. Although they chose to stay at the front line of Grey Castle, they were still concerned about the tribes in the oasis. These people did not have a unified background, but they could form an invisible bond between the two places. They were the best source of soldiers for the local army. And the obsolete old flintlocks became their standard equipment. Suddenly, there was the sound of hurried footsteps outside the tent. "Stop!" the guard shouted. "I'm Jodl from the ambush team. I have something to report to the battalion commander. Let him in." Brian opened his eyes suddenly. The curtain was lifted, and a man with blood all over his face stumbled in. He swayed a few times, and as if he could no longer support himself, he knelt on the ground on one knee. Although he was panting, his eyes were as bright as stars. Chapter 1037. When Brian walked out of the camp, the victorious soldiers were coming back one after another. Compared to the neat and tidy troops when they set out, they were now like a group of refugees. Their bodies were stained with blood, and not a single piece of their clothes was intact. There were either holes here or there, and it was obvious that such scars could only be left after an extremely intense close combat. In addition, the number of soldiers was even more shocking. Less than half of the 2,000 ambushers could walk back standing. In order to transport the wounded, no one rode on the horses or camels, and each horse had to carry 2 or 3 people. Coupled with the captives, the whole team was very scattered. From afar, it did not look like a well-trained army at all. But there was not a trace of depression on their faces. On the contrary, they seemed to be in high spirits, completely different from when they had set out for the battle. It was the first time in the southernmost region that a small tribe had defeated the big clans in the Iron Sand City. Brian knew that after this battle, they had truly transformed from hunters into soldiers. What made him even more satisfied was that although the ambushers were disheveled and their clothes were in tatters, they firmly remembered his instructions. No matter what, soldiers should never abandon their weapons. Most of their water and grain bags were missing, and some of them even lost half of their new shoes, but their guns and sabers were still hanging on their backs. The First Army could not guard the southern border for the Sand Nation forever. They had to rely on their own strength to keep the tribe running according to the order set by Grey Castle. This was only a superficial order from the King of Grey Castle. Brian knew that His Majesty wanted more than that. He needed more soldiers, and he needed the Majins to join the battle of divine will in an organized manner. And now, these people had the qualifications to go one step further. The Flintlock Battalion commander turned around with satisfaction and nodded to Jodl. "Now you can tell me the details of the battle." As far as the battle itself was concerned, there was nothing amazing about it. Instead, it was full of flaws and mistakes. According to the plan, the 2,000 Sand Nation people were divided into 2 groups. One group would pretend to be the bait and sneak back to the Silver Stream Oasis. Then, they would march north along the Silver Stream at night to create the illusion that they wanted to sneak to the Saline Alkali land. The other group would set up an ambush at the last uninhabited oasis at the end of the Silver Stream. The Wildwave and Cutbone clans naturally would not allow a small tribe to challenge their authority. A group of more than 800 cavalrymen set off from the Iron Sand City and followed the footsteps to catch up with the traitors. Even though the bait had more people, they didn't care about the Sand Nation from a small tribe that couldn't even be considered watchdogs. The 2 teams, one fleeing and the other chasing, soon entered the ambush circle. This part was still going according to plan, but everything after that was a mess. The bait should first dismount and surrender. After tricking the other party into dismounting, they would then find an opportunity to scatter the horses, allowing the ambush team to attack. However, the Sand Nation who was in charge of sealing the road had ignited the fire in advance. As the fire soared into the sky, the enemies immediately realized that the situation was not good and began to break through the encirclement in the direction they had come from. If they hadn't prepared a large amount of black water in advance, this ambush would have failed. After that, the battle turned into a chaotic dogfight. The bait group drew their swords and attacked the returning enemies, and the troops that were lying in ambush had no choice but to join in. Many of them had only fired one shot from the beginning to the end, and the previous training of taking turns to shoot and reload were completely useless. The way to determine the winner was still the Sand Nation's most traditional hand-to-hand combat. Just as Brian had said, they did not only have guns as their only weapon. Under the illumination of the fire and the neighing of the horses, this small oasis that was already in a shrunken state became a battlefield of life and death for both sides. Throwing oneself at a rider or having one's intestines trampled by a horse's hooves was a common sight on the battlefield. When two people hugged each other, teeth could also take the opponent's life. It was not that the small tribes did not have warriors. The Sand Nation had to face an extremely harsh living environment from the moment they were born. Those who could survive the sandworms and poisonous scorpions had basically mastered excellent fighting skills. It could be said that in terms of individual strength, the gap between them and the big clans was not so great that they could not catch up. The disadvantage of these tribes was the lack of resources, which limited their reproduction and expansion. No matter how strong a warrior was, he could not defeat an enemy 10 times his size. As long as the tribal form did not change, it was difficult for them to compete with the big clans. But now, this disadvantage did not exist anymore. The warriors of the Sand Nation came from dozens of Silver Stream tribes. They no longer had to fight for resources. Everyone ate the same food, wore the same clothes, trained together, and slept together. In the face of the powerful clans of Iron Sand City, the last thing they lacked was the courage and determination to break the rules. The massacre of the small tribes by the Wild Wave and the Cut Bone tribes happened to make up for this. The battle lasted from night until dawn. The Sand Nation army won the battle like a cornered beast. When the fire was extinguished, only black charcoal was left in the oasis. Without the cover of the trees, the yellow sand would soon bury the water source here, making it completely disappear from the surface of the earth. The silver stream would shrink again until the next oasis was exposed to the erosion of sand and dust. But the Sand Nation people would survive. This battle was like a symbol. It sped up the disappearance of the oasis, but also pointed the way for the other Sand Nation people. After listening to Jodl's report, Brian walked up to the crowd. "Well done. You have won honor for yourselves and a chance of survival for your tribes. This is a victory that belongs to you. You should decide how to deal with the spoils of war." He pointed at the warriors of the big clans who had been captured. Kill them. "Sir, my family died in the hands of these people. I want them to pay with their lives." Under the expectant gaze of the Sand Nation people, Brian raised his right hand and gently waved it down. His meaning was self-evident. Then came the sound of blades being unsheathed. Hot blood immediately dyed the salt sand under his feet red, like flower buds blooming in the snow. The high morale of the warriors reached its peak. But the threat from Iron Sand City has not been completely eliminated. Wild Wave and Cut Bone clans can still send troops to the hinterland of Silverstream at any time. Your people are still under their blades. Brian shouted. The Great Chief has given you the right to enjoy the eternal oasis, but the rebels want to destroy it all. Tell me, what should you do? Attack Iron Sand City and banish them to Blackwater Swamp. Let these people know the consequences of betraying the Great Chief. Battalion Commander, I still have friends in the oasis. Please let them join this team. And me. My sisters can also fight. The crowd instantly burst into cheers. The power contained in the cheers made Gwels and Thuram involuntarily take a step back. Brian looked in the direction of Neverwinter. Your Majesty, the rebels have used their own blood to decorate your coronation ceremony. The scattered Majins are gradually coming together. I think it won't be long before Iron Sand City comes under your control. But this is just the beginning. The entire southernmost region will eventually be in your hands. In this desert, there will no longer be anyone who will resist your will. Chapter 1038. The carnival of the coronation ceremony lasted from noon to night. More than 10 huge pots were set up in the central square, which were filled with fragrant soup. Under the boiling water, all kinds of seasonings and oil were piled up around the pot, which was as thick as a finger. Anyone could throw food into the pot, cook it, and then take it out to enjoy. In a situation where most spices were still luxuries, this kind of banquet was obviously very attractive to them. Some people even brought pots and barrels, hoping to take the rich oil soup back home and slowly taste it. Of course, the city hall would also constantly add new soup and seasonings. When the chopped beef bones and sausages were poured into the pot, the crowd would burst into a burst of high-pitched cheers. In the past months of the demons, such a scene was almost unimaginable. The long winter made people be careful even when they exhaled hot air, because every loss of body temperature meant that they were one step closer to death. But now, they could shout to their heart's content amidst the falling snowflakes and vent the passion in their chests without any worries. Because they knew that the physical strength and temperature consumed could be replenished at any time. There was no need for deliberate guidance. People spontaneously raised hot food in the direction of the castle, offering blessings and songs of praise for the new king's coronation. Sylvie withdrew her gaze and moved it back to the castle hall. The banquet here was also very lively. Fine wine, delicacies, music, laughter, everything that one could wish for was there. When Roland and Anna appeared hand in hand in their new clothes, it caused a lot of people to exclaim in admiration. It was the first time that Sylvie saw such a style of wedding dress. It was completely different from the white dress worn by the chief knight at his wedding. If the former resembled an evening dress, then the latter seemed to be completely designed by Roland. The color scheme of the dress was mainly red and gold, with long sleeves and skirt, and 2 ribbons full of patterns hanging from the shoulders, which looked complex and luxurious. Logically speaking, such a bright outfit could easily overshadow the owner's appearance, but it was just right for Anna. She was the master of flames, and with her strong comprehension ability, she was the most dazzling witch even among the witches, and the bright red color of her outfit further highlighted this point. In addition, the loose design of her clothes gave her a dignified and calm feeling, which was just right for her identity as a queen. Everyone raised their glasses to the two, and Roland and Anna responded with a smile. It could be said that this was a perfect dinner. But Sylvie could not relax at all, because she saw some strange signs at the ceremony. As the owner of the Eye of Magic, she was always the first line of defense in the alert circle, providing timely warnings to the follow-up guards. At such a critical time as the coronation ceremony, it was even more important to strive for absolute safety. Whether it was out of her own ideas, or because of her relationship with Princess Tilly, she hoped that Roland could be safe, so naturally, she would not easily let go of these clues. Individually, each of the signs did not seem to be important, but when put together, they formed a thought-provoking puzzle. This could not help but remind Sylvie of a song that His Majesty occasionally hummed. The lyrics explained by the other party were quite interesting, things like the scorched cane, the abrupt subtle fragrance of flowers, and many seemingly irrelevant fragments eventually led to a deliberately buried truth. By the way, after Mystery Moon heard this song, it had become the song of the detective group. And it seemed to be the situation at that time. Although it was not clear what the problem was, if it was in normal times, she would have notified Nightingale and Ashes to be vigilant. But at this moment, Sylvie still maintained her silence. Because she suddenly remembered what Anna said to her 2 days ago. The person who can prevent the secret from being revealed, often only the person who knows the secret can do it. On this point, I need your help. At that time, she did not really understand the meaning of the words, so she did not pay too much attention to it. Until today, she suddenly understood that this sentence was like the last stroke of a jigsaw puzzle. Once it was completed, the whole picture would have meaning. She had peeped into a secret. This did not make Sylvie feel happy, but instead, she felt a great deal of pressure. Because now, not only did she need to keep this secret, but she also had to prevent others from discovering the traces of the secret. Those scattered strange signs, it was very likely that she was not the only one who had noticed. Sylvie swept the entire hall, and the focus of her observation fell on 3 targets. Achoo! Lorgar rubbed her nose, a suspicious expression on her face. What's wrong? Andrea teased. So wolves can also catch a cold. I don't know if there is something wrong with my nose, but I have been having this illusion since this morning. Lorgar sniffed left and right. The smell in the hall seems to be somewhat inconsistent. It doesn't add up. Ashes interrupted. Can you identify everyone's smell and then match it with the person who has the smell? That's right, Roland said. As long as they are not too far away, or are disturbed by strong odors, Lorgar nodded. There are nearly 100 people in the hall now. Andrea obviously did not believe it. Even if your nose is sensitive, it is impossible to remember so many smells at the same time. Moreover, many people use perfume and there is physical contact, like this, Andrea said, touching the back of the extraordinary's hand with the hand that had just grabbed the chicken leg. I will also be stained with her strange smell. Under such circumstances, you can distinguish it? It is indeed difficult, but it is one thing to distinguish accurately, and another thing is whether there is a smell or not. Lorgar drooped her ears in confusion. Obviously everyone is standing in the same place. Why do several smells come and go intermittently? Ahem, Sylvie's voice suddenly sounded behind the three of them. This should be a disease. Sylvie? Andrea raised her eyebrows. Why are you here? I was walking around and happened to hear your conversation. Andrea shrugged and looked at the wolf girl. The climate of the western region is different from that of the southern desert, and it is very easy to be infected by the cold plague, not to mention this is your first winter here, so it is normal that you are not used to it. If you feel that your nose is not clear, ask Lily for a glass of purifying water, and you will be fine. I was often like this when I first came here. Really? Lorgar suddenly understood. I see. After leaving the three of them, Sylvie breathed a little sigh of relief. Because of her ability, Lorgar Burnflame had a far better sense of hearing and smell than ordinary people. Coupled with her beast-like insight, she was the target that needed to be watched all the time. Fortunately, she had stopped them in time to get closer to the secret trail. And the second key target was Coo, 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 Coo. Maggie, who was squatting on top of Lightning's head, was talking to Joan excitedly. The latter also responded cheerfully, and as they talked back and forth, they seemed to be talking about a particularly interesting topic. No, forget it. Sylvie put her hand on her forehead. Even if they found out something, she would not be able to detect it. Fortunately, it was also impossible for others to get any clues from it. Thinking of this, she focused her attention on the third person through the eye of magic. And that person was the most likely to find out the secret, and also the most difficult one. Chapter 1039. As a key figure in Grey Castle Weekly, Honey's informants were everywhere, and she had the advantages of both Lorgar and Maggie. The olive grove in the backyard of the castle was like her base camp, and it was not easy to avoid her detection. If that was all, it would be fine. Because she was always the first to know the interesting anecdotes in the city, her gatherings usually attracted many witches. For example, now, the witches around Honey were the most concentrated group in the hall. Not to mention Mystery Moon and her detective group, Nightingale, Vendy, and Scroll were not easy to fool. Even Leaf, who had not shown up for a long time, appeared in the crowd and seemed to be talking to Honey. Hide the secrets you know, and keep the secrets. Sylvie glanced at Anna at the other end of the hall, and thinking of her words, she had to bite the bullet and walk over. How are these birds? Leaf's voice quickly came to her ears. I found a new species in the depths of the misty forest. They are not big, but they fly very fast and are very bold. One of them dares to peck at a gray eagle that steals its nest. I thought you might need them, so I brought a nest of them back. There were 2 big and 1 small kingfishers standing on Leaf's shoulder, and they were intimately rubbing against Leaf's cheek. They were not as brave as she had described. Of course, thank you. Honey happily held the birds in her hands. I haven't seen you for a long time. I feel that you can be a bird trainer. They probably treat me as a part of the forest. Leaf smiled. By the way, I'm really surprised by the changes in the city. There are a lot of new houses, magic movies, and newspapers. If it weren't for the fun of exploring the depths of the forest, I would be envious of you. You should come back more often, Vendy said softly. Everyone misses you. I miss you guys too. Leaf lowered her eyes. But only the southeast edge of the misty forest is under the control of the heart of the jungle. I need to be one with the forest for a long time to adapt to the expanding consciousness. If we want to control the entire forest before the war arrives, we have no other choice but to seize the remaining time. You've worked hard too. Scroll lovingly stroked her hair. In the future, I'll ask Lightning to send you the new newspaper every week. Then you'll know what's happening in Neverwinter at any time. That's a good idea, Mystery Moon exclaimed. But what's written in the newspaper is what everyone knows. Compared to that, I'm more interested in the secrets that only a few people know. She looked at Honey and said, "If you find anything, remember to inform the detective group. We have the most powerful explorer here, and we promise to solve all the mysteries for you." Hearing the word secret, Sylvie's heart jumped to the top. This idiot, asking too directly. What should she do to divert the topic? No. It was too difficult for her to avoid the attention of Nightingale and Vendy at the same time while stealthily diverting Mystery Moon's attention. Well, there are indeed a lot of them. Honey tilted her head and said. Mystery Moon's eyes lit up and she hurriedly asked, "For example?" Big crisis, Sylvie thought to herself. Is it useful to pretend to be unconscious or drunk? I don't have such acting skills at all. Sorry, Anna, I've tried my best. Well, although I'm also very curious, I can't say it out. Honey stuck out her tongue. In particular, I can't tell His Majesty, this is Sister Vendy's request. She also said that no matter what kind of vision you find, you must report it to her first. Huh. Mystery Moon looked at Vendy in surprise. This is not fair. Vendy coughed twice and said, I'm doing this for the sake of the Witch Union. It's safer for you not to know some things. Sylvie let out a long sigh of relief. In this way, the last crisis had been resolved. She had successfully kept this secret, right? Thus, Sylvie spent the most difficult dinner party of her life in such a perturbed state. After the dinner, Roland took Anna back to the bedroom. Now it had been decorated into their wedding room. In the flickering candlelight, the girl's figure in the phoenix coronet and red robe seemed a lot more hazy, but it also added a different kind of softness and beauty. He walked up to her, gently took off the coronet on top of her head, pulled up the ends of her hair, and looked into her eyes. In that pair of lake-like clear eyes, he saw ripples of affection. Call me by my name, okay? Anna. She blinked. My full name. Anna Wimbledon. Call me again. Anna Wimbledon. Can you call me 10 times? Roland chuckled. As many times as you want. After listening to him calling her by her ear, Anna finally lowered her head with some embarrassment. Am I a little strange? It is a little. Roland scratched her nose. In the future, this name will make your ears grow calluses. And even if you don't have a surname, you are still my wife. In his original world, marriage did not require one party to change their surname, so he did not care too much about the name after marriage. Even so, I feel like I am complete this way. Anna pressed her chest. It's like I'm finally not alone anymore. This is probably the meaning of the ceremony. Whether it is wearing the coronet or changing the title, it is all an additional external change to obtain a kind of self-recognition. Although the feelings between people do not need to be verified by the ceremony, if this link is missing, you will definitely feel pity and regret when you look back on it later. Roland could not help but reach out and hug her. At this time, any answer seemed redundant. After the two of them cuddled for a while, Anna said, Roland, can I make a request of you? If he remembered correctly, this was the first time she took the initiative to make a request of him. Yes, go ahead. I want to be your Minister of Industry. Roland was a little surprised. That's not a problem, but why do you suddenly? Because I'm just an ordinary girl from a remote town, Anna said with a smile. Now that I suddenly become the Queen of Grey Castle, there must be a lot of people who are dissatisfied, right? Don't worry, no one will dare to say anything about this, Roland comforted her. If everything is settled by you, it will only continue to increase the suspicion. She shook her head. I can't hide behind you like before, only indulging in the things that interest me. I want to do more, to make people speechless from the front. From an unknown witch to a person who could stand on her own? Roland could not help but raise the corner of his mouth. I never planned to let you stay in that narrow backyard. As you wish, my dear. Thank you for agreeing to be willful. Anna tiptoed and kissed his forehead gently. By the way, haven't you always been curious about what I talked about with Nightingale that night? Roland slightly paused. It would be a lie to say that I'm not curious, but... It's okay. She smiled. That was a promise, and it has been fulfilled. Now, carry me up. The candle was extinguished by a wisp of black flame, and the night was like a veil, covering the outline of the two of them. It was a hazy but beautiful night. Chapter 1040. Roland held the third plenary meeting in the castle's reception hall the day after he officially ascended the throne. The main topic of the meeting was the distribution of power that the officials were most concerned about. As supporters of the right side, this was undoubtedly the moment they had been looking forward to for a long time. Working for a local lord and working for a king were two completely different concepts, especially since most of them had worked in City Hall and had a basic understanding of the new king's centralization of power by weakening the local and strengthening the central. This promotion was even more important. This meant that they would become central officials of the Grey Castle Kingdom, no longer managing the western region, and their influence could be said to be stronger than that of the great nobles in the past. Naturally, Roland would not allow this kind of instant success sentiment to continue to swell in his team of officials. Therefore, at the beginning of the meeting, he put the general principles at the forefront. First of all, I would like to congratulate all of you. Those who are invited to this meeting will become part of the elite of Grey Castle. In the next few decades, you will govern this kingdom together with me. You flatter me, Your Majesty. Barav took the lead to stand up, put his hand on his chest and bowed. It's our honor to serve you. If there's anything you need, please tell me. I'll do it without hesitation. Although he spoke humbly, the old director's face was already wrinkled from the smile. Obviously, he was full of expectations for the future. Roland nodded with a smile and gestured for everyone to sit down. Then he said slowly, "But there's one thing I have to say first. Taking back the feudal power of the nobles is to replace them with capable people. The prosperity of a kingdom depends on how many outstanding people are fighting for it. So, I don't want to see you become another kind of nobles." "Of course," Barav hurriedly said. "No one can guarantee that the descendants will have the same talents. All positions should be given to the best." His words immediately drew a chorus of agreement. Not knowing if it was an illusion, Roland felt that these City Hall officials had changed a lot from before. Even their flattery was much smoother, and there was an inexplicable awe in their eyes. This difference gave him a vague sense of pleasure. This was probably the function of the ritual. It was no wonder that Timothy and Garcia would not hesitate to drag more than half of the kingdom into the flames of war in order to obtain this position. However, Roland did not allow himself to be immersed in this emotion for too long. Even if he was the supreme king, he only governed a corner of the vast continent. If he was satisfied with this, then what difference was there between him and some unknown chieftain of an isolated island? The world was so big that he wanted to see it. What you said is just the most basic point. Roland looked around the hall. In fact, no one can guarantee that a capable person will always be qualified for his position. The temptations of the outside world, the solidification of one's thoughts, and the swelling of one's desires could all destroy one's future. You are no exception. As he raised his voice, the officials all lowered their heads, not daring to breathe loudly. Therefore, entering the center is just the beginning. Your abilities and achievements will be comprehensively evaluated every year. After that, whether you will be promoted or stagnate will be determined by the evaluation. Roland paused for a moment. Of course, there will be worse results. For example, those who know that they can't do it, but still cause losses to the kingdom, will be stripped of their positions and sent to the court of justice. Your Majesty, Barav asked cautiously, may I know who will write this evaluation? I'll be responsible for it. Roland looked at him. Any other questions? Although the real investigator was Nightingale from the Security Bureau, it was more appropriate to carry out the investigation in his name. No, I have no more questions. I know what you're thinking, Roland continued. It's not easy to get to this point. It should be the time to reap the rewards. If you have to walk on thin ice and keep working hard in the future, then what's the point of becoming a Central Hall official? What I want to say is, the rewards don't conflict with the above. Instead, it's a symbiotic relationship. As long as you can complete the tasks I give you, I don't mind you making profits for yourself. It's like dividing bread. The bigger the bread, no matter how little you get, you can still fill your stomach. The smaller the bread, even if you eat it alone, you will only get a little. As for the reason that those who stand at the front will get the bread more easily, I think you all know that. The resources that a high-ranking official could obtain were far more than just the salary on the surface. His connections and power were all more efficient capital. If he couldn't even see this point, he didn't need such a person to continue to stay in the city hall. The driving effect of the stick and carrot combination had been verified by the river of history. Although he was still very unfamiliar with it, Roland had begun to familiarize himself with it. Before I announce new appointments and removals, you can still choose to give up. Those who quit will get a large amount of golden dragon as compensation, enough for you to squander for the rest of your life. But once you decide to stay, you have to shoulder the responsibilities and obligations of an official. Now, make your decision. No one stood up. Even Kyle Sichi, the Minister of Chemical Industry, who complained incessantly at the beginning and wanted to resign as soon as possible, remained silent. Apparently, his 2 years of experience in politics had taught him that the position of minister was especially important if he wanted to extract funds from Barov. Very well. Roland smiled. Now, let's announce your appointments and removals. Compared with the previous city hall, the biggest change in the new regime was that it included the towns in the other territories. He directly adopted the modern division method and set the big cities as provinces, governing the towns, villages, and other residential areas in the surrounding areas. The governor, who had the same rank as the minister, was in charge of the provinces. Each province needed to set up a provincial city hall, and its department was responsible for the city hall of Neverwinter. This system was based on the previous second-level city hall, so it wasn't difficult to implement. The only difference was that the workload of the minister would be greatly increased. Correspondingly, the minister's power would also increase by 1 level. Barov Herman was promoted to the head of the hand of the king as he wished. He was in charge of the Ministry of Finance and was also responsible for coordinating the work of the various departments. As the first batch of managers of Border Town and the old director who had trained the most talents for the city hall, this position could not be more suitable. 4 years ago, Roland had casually mentioned it, but now it had become a reality. In addition to the City Hall of King's City, the Army, the Security Bureau, and the Witch Union, Roland had also established a brand new department, the General Staff. Different from the staff organization that specialized in military operations, the General Staff was also responsible for formulating foreign policies. Anything related to strategic plans would be formulated by the General Staff. With the continuous expansion of Greycastle's power and the threat of the Battle of Divine Will, the relationship between Greycastle and the Kingdom of Dawn, the Kingdom of Wolfheart, the Kingdom of Everwinter, and the fjords would inevitably become closer. Roland needed an organization with a broad vision to assist him in controlling the overall situation. Chapter 1041. After the announcement, everyone took the oath of office as per Roland's request. It was the first time for the officials to see such a process, but they still did it meticulously. Many of them even puffed out their chests. There was nothing special in the oath itself. To be faithful to the king and to do his duty was what every courtier used to say. But when it was uttered in such a formal place, in the presence of all, it seemed to take on a form and to take on a meaning that could not be ignored. Roland knew that they were gradually becoming one. Now that you've passed the inauguration ceremony, it's time to get to work. He stood up from the main seat and patted the big map on the wall behind him. Eliminate the demons from the fertile plains, ensure the safety of the northwest of Neverwinter, and lay the foundation for humans to return to the hinterland of the continent. This is the main goal of Greycastle next year. The 2 defeats in the Battle of Divine Will had forced them into a desperate situation. Behind them was the sea, and there was no way out. Whether it was in terms of survival resources or strategic significance, advancing westward was the only way out. If they wanted to gain a foothold on the vast plains, they had to pull out the nail that was Tequila. Without the god's stone mine, the the demons could not erect the obelisk, and Grey Castle could truly have a safe frontline territory. After that, whether it was to concentrate on development or wait for an opportunity to counterattack, the initiative would be in their hands. After all, humans did not need to rely on the red mist to move. When the technological power reached a qualitative change, the attack range of weapons would also be greatly improved. "Yes, Your Majesty," the officials said in unison. After the meeting, Roland returned to his office. Nightingale had already made a cup of black tea and placed it on his desk. "Thank you for your hard work." She still looked relaxed, and the dried fish trembling at the corner of her mouth showed that she was in a good mood. "Ah, thank you." Roland picked up the fragrant teacup and suddenly thought of what Anna had said last night. He could not help but look at her again. As for what the agreement was, Anna had never explained in detail. However, Nightingale had been with everyone during the coronation ceremony in the morning and the wedding banquet in the evening, so it didn't look like she could fulfill the agreement. This riddle was really hard for him to understand. Moreover, Roland faintly felt that if he asked them directly, neither of them would give him the real answer. What happened? Just then, Nightingale's voice suddenly sounded in his ear. "Do I look good today?" He quickly took a sip of tea to hide his absent-mindedness. "I mean, you're right. So is it yes or no?" The latter bent down and put her face in front of his. Roland could even smell the fragrance coming from her hair. "Your heart is in a mess." Before he could reply, Nightingale had already left in a flash. She leaned back on the recliner and began to happily chew on the dried fish. Realizing that she was teasing him, Roland shook his head helplessly, but at the same time he felt lucky. Anyway, at least he was sure of one thing. She was still the Nightingale that he was familiar with. Western region, above the wild snowfield. What's the current speed? There was no answer. Lightning's ears were filled with the howling of the wind. It was very difficult to even open her mouth. If she spoke against the wind, her tongue would probably be torn apart by the knife-like turbulence. She had to operate her magic and activate synchronization. In an instant, the bone-chilling coldness disappeared from her face and the noise of the wind dropped to a bearable level. "Maggie, what's the current speed?" she asked again. "Let me see, Coo." The latter poked half of her head out from the collar under her neck. "Almost twice as fast as a gray eagle, Coo." Probably related to the instinct of a beast, Maggie had an excellent sense of speed. Compared to estimating speed based on magic consumption, it was obviously more convenient to fly with her. 300 kilometers per hour? Lightning sighed slightly. When a gray eagle swooped down from a high altitude, its speed could reach up to 150 kilometers per hour. Few targets could escape such an attack. Now she had far surpassed the gray eagle, but in her heart, she was somewhat not happy. 300 kilometers. This was already the limit of flying without relying on synchronization. Since the evolution of her ability, she spent a lot of time familiarizing herself with her new ability and mastered the active control of magic synchronization. In other words, as long as she could endure the various discomforts of high-speed flying, she could always keep the consumption to a minimum. In this regard, His Majesty also updated her with a full set of equipment, such as a circular mirror windshield, a double-layer thermal insulation lining, and a close-fitting backpack with less resistance. It could be said that the limit of weight had been achieved to the extreme. This series of measures allowed her to continuously break her own flying record, but the limitations of her body still existed. Now it seemed that 300 kilometers per hour might be an insurmountable hurdle. Once he used synchronization, the rate at which he consumed his mana would increase dramatically. Lightning could not help but envy the strong body of an extraordinary. Of course, the ability had been determined the moment it was awakened, and the only thing she could rely on was hard work. Perhaps after returning to Neverwinter, she could ask Lorgar for advice on how to train a stronger body. "Watch out, Coo!" Maggie suddenly shouted in her arms. "We're less than 100 kilometers away from the Tequila ruins." "I see." Lightning closed her eyes and carefully felt the storage of magic in her body. Then she curled up the corner of her mouth and said, "Then let's give the demons a surprise." After mastering the new ability, His Majesty finally agreed to her search for game, no, to investigate. Even at the lowest cruising speed, she was far faster than those clumsy devil beasts. As long as she planned her magic well, the possibility of encountering danger was very small. However, Lightning was not satisfied with this. She still remembered the embarrassing scene 3 years ago when she first explored the barbarian land and was scared out of her wits by the demon ice sculpture in the stone tower ruins. As an explorer, he had actually lost to his guts. Such humiliation had to be compensated. Fear came from the unknown. For her, the demons were no longer scary monsters. Lightning, go all out. Hearing this, the pigeon immediately shrank its head into its collar. The little girl began to increase her speed. Even with the protection of synchronicity, she could feel the sharp increase in the sound of the wind, which turned from a sharp screech to a deep roar. The white land seemed to have turned into a pool of sticky milk. Not only did the outline of the land become blurred, but it also became more and more obvious that the land was flowing backward. Until the moment came, with a loud noise, everything fell silent. She seemed to have broken free from the shackles of the world. The wind and snow were left behind, and she could swim freely in the whole sky. In His Majesty's words, she had become the guide of sound. No matter how many times she repeated it, Lightning would not feel tired. She even felt that she was born for this moment. A few minutes later, the Tequila ruins appeared at the end of the horizon. However, to her surprise, the land around the ruins suddenly changed color. At first glance, it looked like the muddy soil after the snow had melted. But when she took a closer look, she found that it was a mixture of flesh and blood. The dark demonic beasts pressed down on the Tequila ruins from the end of her sight, like a tide hitting the demon's defense line. Chapter 1042. This is. Lightning could not help but widen her eyes and slow down. The demonic beasts numbered in the tens of thousands and formed a wide black carpet on the snowfield. Their moving bodies reminded her of ants gnawing on corpses. But this time, they were not facing corpses at their mercy, but the equally brutal demons. The skeletal monsters, which were as tall as the miracle building, moved slowly among the demonic beasts. It seemed that they were being pushed by the enemies, but with every step they took, several demonic beasts who could not dodge in time would be trampled into meat paste. Compared to their size, the 4 twisted legs were as slender as tree branches. But the little girl knew that if she looked closely, the monster's limbs were probably even thicker than Ms. Agatha's mage tower. Many mad demons attached themselves to its abdomen and launched wave after wave of spear attacks. The demonic beasts could only bite the bullet and move forward, unable to effectively fight back. Magic parasites. She could not help but think of this title. It was a deformed demon between the living and the dead. It did not have a fixed body and lived between the skeletons and black stones like a tumor, relying on magic power to attack or move. The new spider demons in the Battle of the Northbound Slope and the behemoth in front of her now were probably the same kind of demon. No matter how sharp their fangs were, they would basically meet the same end if they hit the stones. Helpless, the demonic beasts could only bypass the skeletal monsters and attack the main force in the rear. Without the protection of the city wall, it should be a fierce battle. However, the berserk beasts might have the upper hand against unarmed humans, but they were clearly powerless against the mad demons who had outstanding strength and speed. Although there were many hybrids among them, the demons had also put the Lord of Hell, the siege beasts, and the spider demons in the front line. The speed at which they killed the hybrids was not much slower than that of the First Army. Obviously, the demonic beasts outnumbered the demons by several times, but the latter still had the upper hand. Maggie probably realized that she had slowed down, so she poked her head out again. Seeing such a shocking scene, she could not help but gasp. The demonic beasts are fighting with the demons, Ku? This must be the reason why Neverwinter has been so peaceful this year during the months of demons. Lightning pretended to be mature and said, "But there is one thing that is very strange. Didn't the ancient Tequila witches say that demonic beasts always come looking for the relics of the gods? If I were the Devil King, I definitely wouldn't bring the relics to this wasteland where there was nothing." In other words, There should be another reason for them to gather here. It's a pity that Sylvie can't travel with us. Otherwise, we would definitely be able to gather more information. Maggie tilted her head. Do you still want to surprise them? Of course. Lightning said without hesitation, we're so close to the Tequila ruins, but the devil beasts haven't come looking for trouble, which means they don't have time to pay attention to the surroundings. This is a great opportunity for us. There was no doubt that the demons and demonic beasts were all enemies of His Majesty. If they could make the monsters fight more fiercely, it would also relieve some pressure on the expedition plan after the beginning of spring. She roughly estimated the magic power in her body. If she flew at a speed faster than the speed of sound, she could probably hold on for about 3 to 4 minutes. To be on the safe side, it was absolutely safe to leave half of her magic power for escape. In the remaining 2 minutes, if they wanted to shake the demon's defense line, it was crucial to choose a flying position. The little girl set her eyes on the skeletal monsters. These huge deformed structures looked like crooked benches from afar. Their bodies were made of flat black stone bones, which were quite similar to the glider runways built by His Majesty on the coast of the East Sea. They were simply ideal targets for a low-altitude pass. According to the results of her ability test, the lower she was from the ground, the more damage she could cause. If she could fly close to the enemies, the mad demon in their abdomen would definitely be greatly affected. Since her high awakening, His Majesty had forced her to instill a lot of high-speed flying principles into her mind. She also learned that the explosion of energy when crossing the sound barrier had a lot to do with the size of the body. If it was Maggie who exceeded the speed of sound in the sky above Neverwinter on the day of her awakening, the whole city would probably suffer. Therefore, the little girl did not plan to defeat the demons in one fell swoop. She just needed to let the mad demon slow down its attack. As there was a death zone right under the skeletal monsters, the demonic beasts had to move to the sides, which greatly hindered their advancement. Without these unscrupulous enemies, the demon's defense line would definitely be under greater pressure. Even if the plan did not succeed, it would not affect her at all. After making the decision, Lightning pressed Maggie's head into her arms and swooped down toward the nearest skeletal monster. At that moment, she had completely thrown Roland's advice to the back of her mind. No one could catch the tail of the sound. It was time to show the demons her real flying skills. She covered the distance of several kilometers in the blink of an eye. When she appeared above the battlefield, she had already entered the realm of silence. But that was only in her eyes. In the eyes of the demons, there was a sudden rumble of thunder in the sky, and it kept pressing down on the ground. It was the explosion caused by the collision between the front and the rear. When Lightning changed her direction and flew 5 meters above the skeletal monster, the explosion turned the snow into clouds of white mist, almost covering the whole body of the monster. The deafening explosion made the demons roar in pain. But she had no time to observe the effect, because there were 5 other similar targets waiting for her on the battlefield. Just when she was about to fly over the 3rd skeleton monster, something unexpected happened. She saw a figure suddenly appear on the bare platform. No one noticed where it came from, but the moment it stood there, it instantly captured all of her attention. Although they were separated by a long distance, Lightning felt a chill run down her spine, and even her fingers could not help but tremble. It was a demon, but it had a very similar appearance to a human. Except for the blue skin, there was almost no other difference. Its facial features were extraordinary, and its golden eyes seemed to be deeper than the abyss of hell. Just by looking at it, Lightning felt like a frog being stared at by a poisonous snake. She felt instinctive fear from the bottom of her heart. What kind of monster is this? She could feel the surging magic power of the demon, which was so strong that it even distorted the surrounding vision. This kind of oppression was almost tangible. She was obviously flying at a high speed, but she felt like she was in a sticky quagmire, and she was getting closer and closer to it. The consciousness in her mind warned her that she could not fly anymore. She must run away immediately. But her body could not move at all, as if it was completely out of her control. And the demon slowly raised its right arm towards her. At this moment, she suddenly felt a sharp pain in her chest. It was as if someone had driven a nail straight into her body. It was Maggie. As the pain spread throughout her body, her limbs instantly returned to her control, and even the passage of time returned to normal. Chapter 1043. Your Majesty, this is this week's financial situation. Barav put away the report in his hand and said excitedly, all in all, the trend of the increase is better than expected. It's not an exaggeration to say that it's a sharp increase. If it were in the past, this would definitely be a miracle. Well done. Roland leaned back in his chair, looking much calmer than Barav. He naturally knew what the old minister meant by a miracle. Ignoring the impact of the months of the demons, the population and the economy had grown faster than in the summer and autumn, which should have been the peak season, as if the heavy snow outside the window did not exist. For the people of this era, this report completely subverted common sense. After all, when winter came, people's activities changed from accumulation to consumption, just like hibernation, and it was common for economic performance to be poor. In the past, Border Town had been directly abandoned, and there were no people there, so how could there be trade and production? But he knew that the nature of hibernation was just a compromise to the environment. Human beings could stand out from thousands of other creatures by relying on their ability to transform the environment. The never-weary cement boats that ignored the wind broke the barrier of the snowbound territory, the heating system and the medical hospitals solved people's worries, and the work in the factory was even more fearless of the wind and snow. When the environmental restrictions were gradually broadened, the day would come sooner or later. In addition, the coronation ceremony and the establishment of the new king's city were also a major reason for the increase in the data. People always liked to go to the lively places, which had not changed for thousands of years. Nowadays, the wide Redwater River seemed a little crowded. The number of cement boats made in Neverwinter had already exceeded the 500 mark a year ago, and the template had also been developed from the original flat transport boat to a variety of models. By reserving slots, the upper hull of the boat could be quickly installed for passenger and commercial use, which was favored by many chambers of commerce. Coupled with the business opportunities of large-scale population migration, cement boats also appeared in the docks of other cities. Since the news of the coronation spread, there were 500 to 600 people arriving in Neverwinter every day through the river. A year ago, Barav thought it was impossible to achieve a goal of 100,000 people, but now the total population of the western region was close to 200,000, 90% of which were in Neverwinter. This also caused the new king's city to be completely different from other traditional cities. It did not have majestic city walls, nor was it divided into inner and outer city districts. Instead, it was divided into circles and circles of streets that continuously expanded outwards, like a forest of houses. Due to the similarity in the style of the houses and the lack of exquisite and luxurious buildings, Neverwinter was also criticized by many people. However, when these words fell into Roland's ears, they all became another kind of praise. Otherwise, how could Neverwinter withstand the rapid population growth? 200,000 was the total number of permanent residents in the rest of the cities. If they had to surround the city with walls and build a few more exquisite buildings such as cathedrals, clock towers, and palaces, it would probably take a few decades to complete. Population was the foundation of industrialization, the guarantee of more factories, and the prerequisite for economic prosperity. As for aesthetics, it was not within his consideration at all. Or rather, in his eyes, the rows of steaming chimneys were much more beautiful than the magnificent palaces. Considering the lag in the spread of news, next year's growth should be even more astonishing. Keep up the good work and you'll get the reward you deserve. Being the hand of the king is the best reward I can get. Besides, these changes are all due to your wise decision. I'm just following your instructions, Barav said, stroking his beard proudly. Roland could not help shaking his head in amusement. Do you have anything else to report? Ah, yes, Your Majesty. The old director hurriedly took out 2 letters from his bosom. Although these 2 letters are addressed to the administrative office, I think only you can make a decision. Oh! Roland took the letters. The name of the sender of the first letter was quite familiar. He seemed to have seen it somewhere before. Cajun Fells? Mr. Cajun is a master of drama in the Old King City. He once came to Neverwinter with a troupe to present a new play for your grand ceremony, but you didn't agree, Barav reminded him. It suddenly occurred to Roland that he had first heard of this name from the businesswoman Marjorie. When asked who was the most familiar person in King City, he blurted out the name of the Magic Hand, which was quite embarrassing. Before the coronation ceremony, an official from the administrative office had indeed reported this to him and presented him with the script as if it was a treasure. However, Roland had refused the official's request after a few glances. Not to mention that the magic movie starring Lorgar was the highlight that he had been preparing for a long time. This boring palace love story was enough to make people doze off. Before he left behind a letter. Although I don't think it's necessary to disturb you with such a small matter. But he's a famous person after all. Do you think? The old butler's voice became softer and softer as if he wanted to say something but stopped. Roland also understood what he was implying. The letter was dated almost a week ago, and the fact that he had waited until now to give it to Roland was enough to show that the old director had put in a lot of effort. Prince Roland had no appreciation for traditional dramas, which was further reinforced by his previous refusal. Barav guessed that Roland did not want to annoy him, so he had waited until now to let Roland read the letter from the master of drama. Roland could tell that the old director held Cajun Fells in high esteem. Not only him, but also Marjorie, Chief Knight, and all the people from the Old King's City seemed to have a good impression of this master of drama. In that case, Roland decided to take a look. Roland shrugged and quickly skimmed through the letter. The content of the letter was about the production method of the magic movie. Cajun wrote in the letter that he first asked the Starflower troupe for the answer, but May told him that the troupe was only responsible for the performance and that it was the Witch Union who transformed the magic movie into an illusion. She could not tell him the specific method because it might be confidential. Roland then wrote another letter to the Witch Union, but it was quickly rejected with the reason that the castle district did not accept direct mail. In the end, he had to go to the administrative office again, hoping to ask the questions on his behalf. Cajun's perseverance surprised Roland a little. Generally speaking, the more a leader of an industry was, the more devastated he would be when the industry was subverted. However, Cajun's words were full of desire for the magic movie and he did not seem frustrated at all. I see, Roland said after a moment of silence. I'll reply to him in this letter. However, both the drama and the magic movie were tools for Neverwinter's publicity. Roland did not have the time or energy to shoot a cliched palace love story, so he might as well tell Cajun directly to give up on the idea. Yes, Your Majesty. Barav heaved a sigh of relief. What about the other letter? Roland asked as he opened the envelope. Since it was addressed to the administrative office, the old director should have screened it in advance. It's from a businessman who calls himself Victor Lothar. Finally, it's not a trade request for bags and popcorn? Roland chuckled. Yes, he wants to buy cotton. Barav nodded. Cotton? Roland's hand stopped involuntarily. Neverwinter doesn't produce this kind of stuff. Chapter 1044. As the greatest contributor to the increase in grain production, Leaf's story had long been written in the form of a comic strip in The Witch Diaries. This kind of booklet was sold in the convenience market, so it was not unusual for foreign merchants to know of her existence. However, he was the first one who specifically requested to cooperate with a witch. Unlike the adventurous fjords, the four kingdoms on the mainland were more influenced by the church and had a much deeper prejudice against witches. Now that someone was willing to take the initiative to contact a witch, Roland was also a little interested. After reading the letter, he touched his chin and said, "From the Kingdom of Dawn. You should know his address, right?" "Yes," Barav said. "He has a record in the administrative office. I also asked Lady Scrolls to check his tax records and found that they dated back 6 years. But at that time, his business was mainly to buy raw gemstones and jewelry, and occasionally some furs, which had nothing to do with cotton." "Interesting." Roland knew very well how simple the tax system of this era was. It completely depended on the tax collector to record the tax. After a long time, even the tax collector could not calculate it clearly, let alone verify it. In addition, it was easy to deal with the permanent property owners. After all, the land was there and could not run away. However, frequent merchants had many ways to avoid the exploitation of the local lord. Keeping a tax record meant that the other party was honest and trustworthy, which was a rare quality among the merchants. Call Victor to the castle. He put down the letter and said, I want to talk to him alone. Yes, Your Majesty. Roland soon met the merchant in the reception hall. He indeed had the characteristics of a person from the Kingdom of Dawn. Like Andrea, he had light blonde hair. His facial features were upper class, and his skin was well maintained. His gestures were completely aristocratic, and his etiquette was just right. At first glance, one could tell that he came from a rich family. It was hard to imagine that such a person needed to travel between the two countries to make a living. Even if it was a large trade, he could have trusted his subordinates to handle it instead of choosing to do it himself. After all, in this era, no matter how rich one was, long-distance travel was not an easy life. The merchant also appropriately explained that it was a family dispute. In order to avoid being bullied by his elder brother and to prove his ability, he had no choice but to leave his hometown and come to Grey Castle to run his business. Although this part of the description was rather vague, Roland did not continue asking. No matter what, it was someone else's private matter, and he wasn't very interested. Nightingale's lack of reaction meant that the merchant wasn't lying. After listening to the introduction, Roland went straight to the point. You want Leaf to cultivate high-yield cotton seeds, but your ultimate goal is to build a brand new clothing store and promote it to the whole kingdom with the advantage of low prices and high quality? This was also one of the reasons why he decided to summon Victor. It was not that his imagination was too rich, but it was written at the end of the letter. It was as if someone had submitted a business plan with a target of raising 1 billion renminbi, and they were only short of 500 renminbi. Not only Grey Castle Kingdom, the merchant said, nodding. I've calculated the price. Even if the final product is shipped to the Kingdom of Dawn, it will still be competitive. Selling at a low price was indeed a magic weapon to seize the market, but this was not an easy thing to achieve. How can you guarantee that it will be of high quality and low price? First of all, I need special cotton, Your Majesty. Victor said excitedly, since Miss Leaf can cultivate golden wheat with 3 times the yield, I think she can also triple the yield of cotton. If the price of raw materials can be lowered to 1/3 of the current price, then clothes will also be much cheaper. Roland could not help but laugh. This logic seemed impeccable, but when he thought about it carefully, he did not know whether to laugh or cry. High-yield cotton was not a difficult thing for Leaf. With the support of the vast magic power of the Heart of Forest, she could further shorten the cultivation time. The problem was that the grain price was so low because it was stable, not because it could not be sold at a high price. It would be a big problem if people could not afford to eat, but cotton was not like that. There were hemp, coarse cloth, and animal skins in front of it. Well, even if Leaf can really triple the yield of cotton, why don't I sell it to other merchants for triple the price instead of selling it to you at a low price? Because I can help you save a lot of initial investment and provide more than 2,000 jobs. Victor did not pause at all. In addition, you can receive endless and generous taxes, and the people can also benefit from it. You don't have to worry about all this. Just leave it to me. Roland had to admit that this extremely modernized answer surprised him once again. After a while, he said, these words, you read them in the newspaper? And I carefully read every publicity announcement in Neverwinter. Although some of the words are a little hard to pronounce at first, they really let me see the significance of business from another aspect. Victor put his hand on his chest and said, if it were another lord, such a proposal of lowering the price would only drive me out. But if it's you, I think it's possible. This is a novel way of flattery. If I drive him out now, won't I become the other lord that he mentioned? Roland slightly raised the corner of his mouth and said, then tell me your plan. Then Victor talked non-stop for nearly an hour. Obviously, he was well prepared in advance. His idea was not complicated. In short, it was to build a business system that integrated planting, weaving, and sales. The Lothar family had a long history of making clothes, so it was not a problem for them to have experience and technology. As long as the project was officially launched, it would soon be effective. Of course, anyone could make a big deal out of it. The reason why Roland kept listening was that he had considered many details. Neverwinter was not suitable for planting cotton, so this part of the industry, together with the textile production, would be concentrated in the Southern Territory. The Southern Territory had abundant sunshine and a relatively high temperature all year round. At the same time, the Sand Nation would also bring a large number of laborers. All aspects of the conditions were very suitable. The sewing and garment departments were set up in Neverwinter, which had a higher purchasing power. In the early stage, whether it was the rental of land, the recruitment of planters, or the investment of textile factories and equipment, all were borne by Victor, so Neverwinter did not have to bear any risks. In addition to providing high-yield seeds, the whole process was in a positive state. In addition, because cotton only had a single use, it was easy to estimate the output from the purchase quantity. Therefore, the tax was very convenient, which would reduce the burden on both sides. Among these details, there were two that Roland was interested in. First, the high-efficiency spinning tools that Victor had mentioned could handle the processing of cotton with 3 times the output. Second, the Lothar family had a group of experienced tailors who often designed clothes for the nobles in the city of Glow, so the finished products would be popular among the people. Victor also admitted that he had come up with this idea after watching The Wolf Princess, and finding that the people of Neverwinter were still very simple in their clothes, which was not the style that the king's city should have. Chapter 1045. The company, Roland said in a low voice. Victor was slightly startled. If you have any doubts, I can explain it again. No need. Roland waved his hand. This is indeed an interesting plan. At least it seems to be fine. If you want to implement it, how long will it take for you to prepare the funds? Victor's eyes lit up with joy. I knew you would understand it. Please forgive my rudeness, Your Majesty. If you were also a businessman, your achievements would definitely not be inferior to any big chamber of commerce. This metaphor seemed to lower the status of the king, but it was a way of expressing a high degree of recognition in aristocratic etiquette and could also be regarded as a kind of undisguised flattery. At this moment, Roland had a completely different idea. Isn't this a large-scale industrial company in the future? Settle down with technology, recruit workers, organize production and marketing, and control profits and losses. He did not expect to hear such a complete plan from a contemporary person. The biggest difference between this plan and the Chamber of Commerce was that this plan combined production and sales, which could be said to be the prototype of modern private enterprises. This might be an excellent opportunity. In the past 4 years, his territory had achieved rapid development, but it had gradually revealed its shortcomings. That was, the administrative office almost took care of everything. Every project needed to be controlled by the administrative office. From the establishment of staff to the allocation of budget, these complicated work regulations took up most of the time of the officials. As the scale of the project continued to expand, it was bound to become more and more bloated, and the administrative efficiency would accordingly decrease. This could be regarded as a common problem of state-owned enterprises. Once the profits and losses had nothing to do with the participants, stability was everything. It had the advantage of being determined by the will of the higher-ups regardless of the returns. It could quickly meet the needs in the early stage and could also be used to conquer those risky strategic projects in the later stage. But it did not mean that it was omnipotent. This was also one of the reasons why Roland focused on developing heavy industry and agriculture in Neverwinter and paid little attention to light industry. In addition to the limited labor force, the administrative office could not provide so many officials to cope with the expansion of the types of industries. After all, it was easy to issue an order, but to really implement it, even if it was to build a steam engine assembly plant, it would need the support of a whole team of people. But now, he had a new choice. Before he could use any means to attract investment, Someone had already taken the initiative to send it to him. Naturally, Roland had no reason to refuse. Although this company had the background of a foreign aristocratic family and would inevitably cause a certain amount of golden dragon to flow out after the profit, as long as its production department was in Grey Castle, this was not a big deal. After reaching a preliminary agreement, Roland personally sent Victor to the gate of the castle. "When you are ready, I think the new cotton seeds should be cultivated. But I have to make one thing clear. If there are other businessmen who want to follow your example, the administrative office will sell the seeds to them at the same price. The more abundant the goods on the market, the more affordable the price. You should know this better than me." "Of course, Your Majesty," Victor said confidently. "The merchants of the Kingdom of Dawn are never afraid of competition. My father always said that from the moment we were born, the competition began." When he was about to leave, Roland suddenly stopped him. "By the way, I want to ask you a question. My minister found out that 6 years ago, you paid taxes to Longsong Stronghold. Why? At that time, if you wanted to save this amount of money, it should have been easy for you, right?" Victor nodded. "But at that time, the Lord promised that as long as the taxes were paid, he would provide some convenience and protection for the caravans traveling between the border and Longsong Stronghold. And he did so. At that time, this amount of money could at least prevent the threat of wild beasts and attacks from his peers. I always feel that it is good for businessmen to pay a little price for a stable and orderly rule. Unfortunately, many people would rather invest a large amount of money on worthless goods than regard the rule as one of the costs." What an interesting person, Roland could not help thinking as he watched the merchant leave. With such a person as an example, the private enterprises of Grey Castle should also usher in a period of rapid and vigorous development. Just as he was about to return to his office, Nightingale's anxious voice suddenly rang in his ear. "Your Majesty, Lightning is back. She seems to be in trouble. What's the situation?" Roland asked hurriedly. "I'm not sure. I just received a message from Sylvie. After she was brought back by Maggie, she was directly sent to the hospital." Roland's heart suddenly sank. "She's injured? Take me to see her now." "Yes, Your Majesty." Nightingale reached out to grab him, and then the two of them disappeared into the mist together. After arriving at the hospital in the west of the city, Roland saw the little girl lying on the bed. The moment he opened the door, his worries were greatly dispelled. Lightning looked unscathed, and there were no obvious wounds or bloodstains on her face. Her chest was still moving up and down, which meant that she was fine. Even if she had encountered danger during the investigation, she was now safe. But he soon found that something was wrong. Nana did not feel relieved at all after completing the treatment. Instead, she frowned and looked down at her hands with a puzzled look. Maggie was nervously lying on the bed, wiping Lightning's forehead with her hand. When she saw Roland, she even shrank her neck into her clothes, as if she had done something wrong. At this moment, Roland noticed that Maggie's face was constantly sweating, and her slightly open lips were letting out shallow moans, as if she was immersed in a nightmare. "What's the matter?" Roland looked at Nana. "Where is Lightning hurt?" Nana raised her head and slowly pointed to her chest. "Nightingale." Nightingale walked forward, carefully picked up Lightning, helped her take off the special windproof coat, and then slowly unbuttoned the lining. Just as she reached the collarbone, she could not help but stop. "Your Majesty, this is..." Roland approached the bed and found that there was a thumb-sized wound 2 fingers below Lightning's neck. Compared with the surrounding snow-white skin, the wound was particularly eye-catching. But if you looked closely, you would find that it did not even hurt the muscle layer, but only the skin. It was a small wound that would heal itself if left unattended. It was reasonable to say that healing such a wound would be a trivial matter for Nana in the blink of an eye. But what she said next made Roland freeze in place. Chapter 1046. Her ability failed? Nightingale looked at Maggie in surprise. Was she hurt by a senior demon? Maggie's voice was as soft as a mosquito's. "What?" "Yes," she answered again, And this time everyone heard Maggie's words clearly. I pecked her coo. What? Roland and Nightingale looked at each other and saw the look of disbelief in each other's eyes. Then, both of them asked almost simultaneously, what happened at that time? You can tell us from the beginning to the end first. After understanding the whole story, Roland frowned deeply. A powerful demon that looked very similar to a human, even from a distance, would feel a strong sense of fear. Moreover, lightning was flying at the speed of sound at that time, but she was still stared at by the demon? Compared to this information, the news of demonic beasts and demons fighting on the snowfield and the skeleton monster attacking as a weapon were not so shocking. In order to wake Lightning up, Maggie pecked her on the chest hard, so that both of them could escape. Otherwise, if she continued to fly, she would sooner or later run into the arms of the enemy. There was no doubt that the wound could not heal because of Maggie. Not to mention that she did not have such an ability. Even if she did, she would certainly not want to hurt her closest friend. So, he could only look for the reason from Lightning. Thinking of this, he could not help but sigh secretly. Before they set off, he had repeatedly told her not to rely on her new ability to go into danger alone. Coming back safely was more important than anything else. In the end, she still couldn't control that impulse. Perhaps this was the nature inherited from the blood of an explorer. But at this moment, he was not in the mood to blame Lightning. The urgent task was not to pursue the fault, but to find out what the problem was. Roland asked Nightingale to call Vendi, Lily, Agatha, and Nightfall. In addition to further examination, they also planted the seed of symbiosis to prevent accidents. The group of people busied themselves until the evening, when Lightning finally woke up from her coma, and a comprehensive physical examination had also come to a preliminary conclusion. Are you saying that her body is fine? After listening to Agatha's report, Roland turned around and stole a glance at the pale little girl curled up in Vendi's arms. How can this be considered safe and sound? The previous drowsiness was due to the exhaustion caused by flying for a long period of time. The seed of symbiosis can also prove this. Nightfall did not feel any discomfort. This meant that her low condition was caused by mental panic and had nothing to do with her body. In theory, a few more days of rest should be enough. What happened to the wound? That's what I wanted to say next, Agatha said in a low voice. Her problem lies in her magic power. When I used the stone of measuring to check, I felt a trace of feedback that didn't belong to her. What do you mean? Roland was startled. You should know that although magic power is everywhere, if you want to use it, you must first make it your own. This is what we often call condensation. Whether it is the cyclone or the advanced hieroglyphs, they all belong to this category. The demons are no exception, but the magic power they possess is completely different from that of witches. When it is reflected in the stone of measuring, it is like the difference between clean water and rotten juice. She paused for a moment and said, and the strange feedback I received was almost the same as that of the demons. Roland suddenly felt that things were a little tricky. You mean, the demons have eroded Lightning's magic power, without direct contact? How is that possible? Nightingale questioned. I can easily distinguish different types of magic power in the misty world. If she was eroded, I should be able to tell at a glance. Compared to Lightning's own magic power, it is too subtle, so it is very normal that it was overlooked. Agatha shook her head. But this is only from the perception of the stone of measuring. As for whether it is the erosion that your Majesty mentioned, I am not sure. Roland quickly understood the meaning of her words. Demons have never had such an ability before? If it is only affected by sight without direct contact, such an ability is not rare. For example, the fearsome demon is the most typical example. It is not unusual for senior demons to have similar characteristics. After all, they obtain their power through the magic stone, and it is not predestined when they awaken. But I have never heard of this kind of effect that prevents the wound from healing. Agatha muttered. If part of the magic power really comes from the demons and is attached to the wound, then everything makes sense. Indeed, if this was caused by the demon's ability, it could explain why Nana's treatment suddenly became ineffective. She could cure demons, But it did not mean that she could ignore the malicious power of the demons. Roland asked in a low voice, "Then what's the solution?" "I don't know for now," the Ice Witch said bluntly. "Theoretically, the magic power effect can be broken by approaching the god's stone of retaliation, but it turns out that this ability is obviously not that simple. Since it works on the wound, how about we cut off the surrounding area of the wound and then treat it? I suggest you don't do that. If it continues to expand along with the wound, it will be difficult to save the situation. At least for now, this little injury of Lightning's will not affect her safety." Agatha rejected. "In the next few days, it is better to let her stay in the third border city and continue to observe her for a while. Pasha and the others know more than I do. Maybe they can find a way to dispel it." "I see." Roland nodded and slowly walked to the bedside. Seeing him, Lightning immediately lowered her head and sounded as if she was about to cry. "Your Majesty, I'm sorry." You don't have to say anything." Roland reached out and touched her head. "Just rest well. I will definitely cure you." Lightning's body trembled as if she was trying her best to hold back her tears. After a long time, she gave an almost imperceptible response. 3 days later, Roland received a report on Tequila's progress. He immediately set off with Nightingale, Vendi, and the others, entering the third border city hidden deep under the North Slope Mountains. Pasha received him at the entrance of the hall. "How is Lightning?" "She has recovered a lot. Elena has been by her side these days, telling her all the interesting stories in the dream world. She almost forgot the encounter with the senior demon," Pasha said with a smile. "She even flew around the hall with Maggie today, so the small wound on her chest didn't affect her movements at all." Hearing this, Roland was a little relieved. In order not to make Thunder worry, only a few witches knew about Lightning's experience. However, if she did not show up for a long time, it would inevitably cause people to worry, and then it would be difficult to hide. "Did you find out what kind of ability it is?" Vendi asked eagerly. Celine went through all the documents left by Tequila, but still couldn't find any matching records. Therefore, we can be sure that this should be a new ability of the demons. However, it did not mean that there was no similar ability. In fact, the effect it caused was quite similar to a rare special ability. "What's that?" Chapter 1047. Curse. Roland couldn't help but repeat. The words sounded ominous no matter how he thought about it. "Please follow me." Pasha turned around and led them into a cave next to the main hall. The stone walls inside were carved with grooves, and all kinds of books and scrolls were piled up on the grooves. The number of books here was even more than those in the pivotal hall. "Celine, His Majesty is here." "Got it," Celine's voice echoed in everyone's mind before they even saw her. Then a tentacle descended from the bottom of the cave, dropping a pile of books with a clatter, and quickly retracted back into the darkness. Before that, the tentacle also symbolically bent towards Roland, probably as a sign of respect. "Ahem. Sorry, she'll be more forgetful when she meets a new research subject. After all, there are very few witches who are as lucky as Lightning. She was cursed but didn't suffer any fatal injuries." "She won't do anything to Lightning, will she?" When it came to research subjects, Roland couldn't help but think of the little white mice that were placed in all kinds of positions. "Don't worry, the main method of magic research is still observation and recording, but with the help of the core, she can clearly see the flow of every strand of magic." Pasha rolled up the book on the ground and spread it out in front of everyone. "Look here, and here." Roland noticed that most of these pages were yellowed, which meant that they were ancient books left behind from the Tequila era. At the position indicated by the other party, in addition to the original text recorded in the witch's language, there was also a translated note attached, which was undoubtedly a temporary excerpt for this purpose. He took a closer look and found that it was an account of 2 wars. During the siege of the Land of Dawn, 8 wounded witches were rescued by the reinforcements. They should have been able to survive, but in the end, they all died one by one. The cause of death was that all treatment methods were ineffective, the wound could not heal, resulting in excessive blood loss and the infection of the demonic disease. Before they died, they both endured terrible torture, to the point that the two of them chose to commit suicide. Pasha said slowly, because it was too long ago, the specific details of the battle are not known. The author only recorded this incredible scene, and it was here that the curse of the devil was first mentioned. The other time was closer to our time. A senior demon, called the Soul Snatcher by the Union, had a fierce battle with the witch army in Thousand Lakes, on the edge of the fertile plains. This cruel monster could attach magic power to the black stone spear. Once hit, the body would continuously deteriorate until it withered. Pasha paused for a moment. 3 extraordinaries died in its hands, and the Quest Society found strange magic in the bodies of the victims. Roland had already guessed the conclusion. That magic power came from the enemy? That's right. Pasha nodded her tentacles. That's why we speculated that these abilities might belong to the same type. They will always remain in the target's body and cause continuous damage. Conventional treatment methods were ineffective, and it was difficult to rely on external forces to remove it. Indeed, it's like a curse. Vendi could not help but feel a little sad. This is too terrible. Nightingale noticed the wording of Pasha's words. It's difficult to rely on external forces to remove it, which means there are ways to remove it. Pasha continued to turn the page. That is, if our inference is correct. Roland quickly skimmed through the last part of the description. Just when Thousand Lakes was on the brink of destruction, a witch called Samantha stood up and fought with her life on the line, awakening as a transcendent and slaying the soul flayer with her sword. After the senior demon was split into 2, Samantha, who thought that she would follow in the footsteps of her companions, survived safely, as if the curse had never existed. Because Thousand Lakes was too close to the Red Mist area, it was declared lost a year later, but she had bought enough time for people to evacuate. After that, Samantha used her extremely strong will to make the Union adopt the 3-chief system, and she became one of the first 3 chiefs. Seeing this, Roland immediately understood what Samantha meant. If lightning was really affected by the magic curse, then killing her might be the only way to remove it. However, it was indeed very difficult to do so. The battle at the Snow Mountain camp and the battle at the northbound slope had proved the senior demon's amazing mobility. If they insisted on fighting the First Army head-on, it would be fine. However, if they did not intend to fight head-on, it would be too risky to catch up with and destroy them. In the Tequila era, this would have been an impossible task. The senior demons usually acted together with the army and were like the core of the army. It was already difficult to win, let alone to kill all the enemies. Roland could not help but think of the unknown witch who wrote the letter to Natalia. Now that he thought about it, she might also have been injured by a similar ability, which was why she left those last words. A person who could communicate with the 3 chiefs by letter was definitely not an ordinary person. Her ability and status should be at the top of the Union. However, even she could only silently accept the final outcome. If she wanted to find the powerful enemy among the thousands of demons and eliminate it, she would have to sacrifice more witches' lives. Between the 2 evils, it was clear which choice to make. Nightingale probably also thought of this and unconsciously clenched her hands into fists. Roland pondered for a moment and then said, "It's indeed difficult, but I will never give up this possibility." Pasha was silent for a while. "If that's what you want. Before that, I want to know something. If the senior demon Lightning Met has the ability to release a curse without touching it, what will happen to ordinary people?" "It will be much worse than a witch," Celine's voice suddenly interrupted. Celine's voice suddenly interrupted again. "Magic power gives us a stronger recovery ability and resistance, which makes it difficult for the common demonic plague, which is the tiny creatures you mentioned in the book, to infect us. But ordinary people can't. As long as their wounds don't heal, they will be in danger of worsening or even dying. Can the God's Stone of Retaliation resist this ability?" "Of course it can. In fact, if the soul snatchers mentioned in the ancient book were not as strong as the extraordinary, they wouldn't have caused such a great loss to the Union. But..." Celine paused. According to Lightning's information, we can't rule out the possibility that the senior demon is also a magic slayer. If that's the case, the god's stone of retaliation will be very limited. The more powerful a demon was, the more it looked like a human. This was the experience the Union had learned from the 2 battles of divine will. Roland took a deep breath. Celine's warning was not an exaggeration. According to Lightning's description, the new senior demon was likely to be more difficult to deal with than all the previous enemies. Chapter 1048. Lightning and Maggie slowly landed on the roof of the witch building. After closing the door of the corridor, the howling cold wind subsided a lot, leaving only a few whispers that slipped in through the cracks. "Phew, my hair is all wet, coo." The pigeon shook off the snowflakes on her body and turned back into a human. Her wings swelled to both sides and eventually turned into her white hair that reached her ankles. Although it looked and felt very soft, the girl's hair was not blown into a mess by the strong wind. Instead, it wrapped around her like a cotton ball. However, due to being soaked by the snow, her hair appeared to be a little dull and had lost its initial fluffiness. "Well, you should take a bath first in case you catch a cold." Lightning took off her windproof eye mask and glanced outside the door. The weather during the months of the demons was always so unpredictable. Just now, there were only scattered snowflakes, but now it was windy and snowy. The world was full of palm-sized snowflakes, so she had to temporarily stop her recovery training. "Aren't you going to take a bath with me?" Maggie asked in surprise. Didn't His Majesty say that the wound should be kept dry and not in contact with water? Lightning shrugged and said, "So I'll just use hot water to rub it. Anyway, this coat won't let the snow water seep in." "I see." She pushed away the bangs stuck in front of her face and grinned, showing her white teeth. "Then I'll help you after I take a bath. In the past, Ashes often praised me for rubbing your back. It was very comfortable and I didn't need a towel, coo." How do you rub it?" "Like this, coo." She grabbed 2 bunches of hair and made a circle gesture. "I refuse." Lightning rolled her eyes. "If it's a towel, I'll consider it. Anyway, hurry up." "Oh." After Maggie ran to the castle with the bathtub, Lightning went back to her bedroom alone. She closed the door, leaned against the door, and stretched out her right hand. Even now, her fingertips were still trembling uncontrollably, as if they were out of her control. She couldn't help but smile bitterly. As long as she closed her eyes, the image of the devil would always appear in her mind. After these days of recovery, the fear did not leave her, but took root in her heart. This was the first time that Lightning had encountered such a situation. Whether it was in front of His Majesty or her companions in the exploration group, she tried her best to look relaxed, as if the injury was not a big deal. Even Nightingale did not notice anything wrong with her. But in fact, only she knew how bad her situation was. He had asked Maggie to take a bath alone because he was afraid that Maggie would be able to see through this, to see how fragile this self-proclaimed adventurer was. Lightning slowly slid to the ground and buried her head between her knees. Although Phyllis comforted her by telling her that the enemy might have the ability to inflict fear by looking at her, she knew that it was not an excuse. Witches had a high resistance to mental influence, not to mention that it had been a long time. At that time, Maggie was also affected by the devil, but Maggie's performance was much better than hers. If it was just fear, it would not be a big deal. It was not the first time that she had felt fear. Fear came from the unknown. Unless one could be omniscient, there was no way to avoid fear. The key was after the fear. In the past, this kind of emotion would not bother her for too long. Instead, it would arouse her resistance. She had always believed that nothing could really scare her. However, this time, Lightning found that there was only emptiness left in her heart. Not to mention resistance, she did not even want to think about the scene at that time. Today, during the recovery training, she lingered in the east of Neverwinter and did not go beyond the city wall. It was not because of her ability or body, but because she was afraid of the bottomless snowfield. The ground under her feet seemed to become a steep cliff, and the edge of the sky seemed to be a crack that swallowed everything. Just looking into the distance, she could feel the trembling from the bottom of her heart. She was not defeated by the devil's magic power, but frightened by the devil's evil and power, as if she had encountered a predator's prey. This kind of fear was even more serious than the influence of the devil's magic power, and even hindered her flight. Lightning hugged her knees tightly. What leader of the exploration group? She was just a coward. If Thunder was still by her side, what would he do? For someone who had crossed countless dangerous seas, he must have a way to deal with this kind of situation, right? Father. She could not help but murmur. What should I do? South of the misty forest, Forest Station Number 0. This was also the starting station of the Barbarian Railway line. With the success of the steam train, the development of the forest in Neverwinter would be greatly improved. From wood to food, and even the coal mines near the snow mountains, everything was included in the new railway line plan. In the coming year, this vast forest, which was originally uninhabited and full of wild beasts, would become a Real treasure house. But now, the railway was still built for only one purpose. That was war. The area around the station had been blocked by the First Army, waiting for His Majesty to test the new weapon. Iron Axe was naturally one of them. He still remembered the scene 4 years ago when he followed His Majesty to participate in the test of gunpowder explosion. At that time, he was just an insignificant hunter who regarded gunpowder as the fire of divine punishment. The earth-shaking roar seemed to have opened a door for him that he had never seen before. From that day on, his fate had changed dramatically. Now, as the commander of the First Army in Grey Castle, Iron Axe naturally would not passively participate in the test like before. He had long known what he was going to face today. In fact, it could not really be regarded as a new weapon. Its two main parts, the cannon and the train, had already been shown in front of everyone, so it was certainly not fresh. Because of this, he thought that he could finally put away his surprise and get through the test in a relatively calm mood. It should be like this. After all, he was an important minister of His Majesty, so he should be calm at all times. Even if his back was facing the thunder and fire, he should still smile, just like His Majesty himself. However, as the whistle blew and the new weapon slowly drove out of the garage, Iron Axe found that he was wrong. The train was no longer what it looked like when they first saw it. It was completely covered with black steel plates, and only half of the wheels were exposed. The outline of the train was square and angular, and it gave off a strong sense of oppression when seen from the front. It formed a sharp contrast with the surrounding snowy landscape. It was definitely not a good thing. With just a glance, one would understand this logic. His Majesty often said that machines were wonderful things. Iron Axe did not quite understand it, but when he saw the white mist spurting out from the roof and between the wheels and brushing over the neatly riveted surface of the armor, Iron Axe suddenly understood what His Majesty meant. The giant steel ship was also shocking, but it was less attractive than the train in front of him. Because it was not just a machine. Chapter 1049. When the train stopped in front of them, Iron Axe could finally see it in its entirety. It had a total of 5 segments, much shorter than the one that had been shown to the public. However, because it was wrapped in steel, it looked much thicker and larger. Coupled with its non-reflective pitch-black exterior, it looked like a crouching wild beast. The shape of the front and the back of the vehicle was exactly the same, but they were arranged symmetrically. Apart from the 2 rotating machine gun turrets, there were also many small holes on the armor belt below. Without a doubt, those holes were for the soldiers to observe and shoot. Iron Axe could already imagine the scene when the enemies rushed toward the new weapon. Spears fell like rain and hit the steel plates, making clanking sounds. However, the train did not move at all and kept moving forward at a steady speed. At the same time, it spouted more than a dozen fireballs at the enemies from one side of its body, turning them into beehives. Whether it was the demons or the demonic beasts, they could only be beaten passively and could not fight back at all. It was like a moving city wall, providing the most reliable protection for the First Army wherever it went. Just thinking about it made Iron Axe excited. The soldiers who were in charge of guarding around the train began to murmur. However, this was not the most eye-catching part of the train. In addition to stabilizing the front line for the First Army, its ultimate goal was to destroy the Tequila ruins and those tower-like skeletal monsters. Therefore, large-caliber cannons were necessary. At this moment, these two deadly weapons were placed in the second and fourth carriages. Although they were still equipped with 152mm Longsong cannons, according to His Majesty, the barrels of these cannons were longer and had more charges. The difference could be seen with the naked eye. One cannon took up almost all the space in the carriage, and even a machine gun could not fit inside. The tail of the cannon was also surrounded by a huge iron shell, which was even wider than the body of the carriage. In this way, even if the demons attacked from the air, the artillerymen could not interrupt the shooting. The only thing that worried Iron Axe was that although this new encirclement design was extremely safe, it also added a lot of weight and volume, which made the train feel quite top-heavy. In particular, the cannons needed to be adjusted when shooting. If the whole carriage rotated, could the train withstand the fierce impact when firing? Your Majesty, a soldier trotted to the king and saluted. All personnel are ready. Please give the order. This is a weapon that has yet to be officially installed. Whether it is maintenance or improvement, it is the responsibility of the engineering department. Roland smiled and shook his head. So, I'm not the one in charge of the test today. It's the Minister of Engineering. You should report to her. Only then did Iron Axe notice that the Queen had also attended the test, but compared to the other witches, she was dressed in a work uniform, so he did not recognize her at first sight. Your Highness the Queen. The soldier stammered. He bowed to Anna again. All personnel are ready, I understand, Anna replied calmly. Let them start the test. The reporter shouted at the train. Activate the cannon. This little episode made everyone smile in understanding, but it did not affect the test at all. Following the command, the alarm echoed over the forest for a while. Woo, woo, Iron Axe immediately looked back at the train. When he heard the creaking sound of the capstan, he was surprised to find that the body of the train had changed. Two thick iron legs unfolded under the second and fourth carriages. Before this, he had thought they were just insignificant baffles. It was not until they were completely unfolded that Iron Axe realized that it was a set of independent machinery. A flat iron plate was fixed at the end of the iron legs. When it fell into the snow, it even slightly propped up the carriage, like the long leg of a giant spider. Isn't this what a deformed demon looks like? Did His Majesty get this inspiration from the enemy and use it on a new weapon? But in any case, the pure metal combination did not look evil at all. Instead, it was full of majestic momentum. When these iron legs were completely fixed, the cannons finally pointed to the sky and made the first roar. In the violent tremors and airflow, the black beast did not move at all, as if it had solidified into the earth. It seems that the effect is good. Roland took off his earplugs and nodded approvingly at Anna. Long before loading the train, these subsystems had been tested many times. This time, it was just to verify the integrated system's performance, so it was not surprising that the first shot was successful. In fact, compared to the armored train's firepower unit and power unit, he valued the 4 supporting legs under the gun seat more. This could be regarded as the first practical test of a hydraulic device. According to Pascal's principle, the pressure on a closed liquid was equal in all directions. Therefore, in a U-shaped tube with unequal cross-section area, only a small force was needed to squeeze the small cross-section area to transmit a much larger force to the large cross-section area. Because of this magnifying effect, hydraulic devices have a wide range of applications. From manual pressure jacks to pumping control machine tools, it can be seen everywhere. The only difficulty was the processing and sealing, but for the current Neverwinter, there were no technical difficulties. The train was loaded with a set of hydraulic support equipment controlled by an electric motor. 2 steam-powered locomotives, one pushing and the other pulling, drove the armored train at a speed of more than 40 kilometers per hour. Next were 2 rows of artillery units, with 15 rounds of ammunition in the turret, which made the armored train look particularly large. In the middle was the ammunition loading vehicle, which was also the power source of the entire train. One dawn I could meet the needs of 2 hydraulic pumps, lighting, and ventilation in the train. These 5 carriages formed the most basic armored train unit. If speed was not the goal, new carriages could be added to the front and back of the train, such as a troop carrier or a sentry vehicle with more powerful suppressive firepower. This was also the charm of the armored train. By changing the trailer, a variety of tactical weapons could be assembled. Amidst the exclamations of the crowd, Edith walked towards him with a smile. In this way, the most important part of the plan to attack Tequila has been completed, she said with a hand on her chest. Does this new weapon have a name? Roland thought for a moment and said, let's call it Black River. Black River? Edith rolled her eyes. It corresponds to the demon's bloodline? Roland could not help but smile. That's right. In areas where the red mist could not cover, the demons had once transported hundreds of crisscrossing red mist bloodlines to maintain the frontline outposts. These lines were not only their lifelines, but also the bloody lines that the Union was extremely afraid of. Now, there would be another color of lifelines on the fertile plains. Chapter 1050. Knock, knock, knock. Not long after dawn, there was a knock on the door of the mud hut. Good, are you up? We should go now. I'll be ready soon. Good drank the last mouthful of hot porridge, wiped his mouth, and looked at the girl who was still busy making the bed. Then I'll go. She looked up and asked, You really don't need me to go with you? I've told you many times that you're too young. There won't be a job suitable for you, Good said impatiently. Stop. I know you're going to talk about what happened in the kingdom of Wolfheart again, but do you still want to do that kind of work? Stay here. I'll bring back delicious food for you at noon. The girl's eyes lit up. Popcorn, that's too expensive. I like egg pancakes. Or do you not like flowing heart eggs that are fried until both sides are brown? Gulp. She swallowed her saliva. So don't run around. Do you understand? Good reminded her one last time. By the way, what's your name? Rachel. What should you call me? She was a little hesitant, but she finally replied, Brother. Very good. Don't let it slip. Good tightened the sackcloth around his neck, pushed the door open and walked out of the mud hut. The warm air was immediately chased away by the cold wind, and winter returned to its familiar look. Even so, the scene in front of him was full of vitality and vitality. Row after row of mud houses stretched out like waves surging on the snowy ground. Looking up, one could see the smoke of cooking and the swaying silhouettes of people everywhere. The city in the distance was faintly discernible in the smoke, as if it was still in a deep sleep, while this place across the river had already woken up. The people who knocked on the door were Uncle Baggy and Sanko, who lived next door. Standing dozens of steps away, they urged, What are you waiting for? Hurry up. Coming. He closed the door and ran toward them on the snow. The temporary residence was about 2 miles away from the center of Neverwinter. The 3 of them had to get to the central square before the new job was announced. Fortunately, a solid stone road had been built along the banks of the Redwater River, so even if it was covered with snow, it was still very safe to walk on it. There was no need to worry about the mountain road that needed to be explored step by step, so they could reach it in about a quarter of an hour. Soon, there were more people around them. The scale of the temporary residential area was beyond imagination. Good had not even seen the end of it. According to the uncle next door, the mud huts used to be built in the city, but as the population increased, the hills were all moved out of the city. Because it was expanded every year, no one knew how many immigrants it had accommodated. However, there was one thing that was certain. Most of the people who had gathered on the stone path from their residences were there for their new jobs. Have you thought about what you want to do next? Baggy asked. It should be something easier, like sweeping the snow and de-icing. Sanko said, holding the back of his head. Time is short, money is fast. If you work for 1 day, you can feed yourself for 2 days. At least you don't have to worry about starvation this winter. Of course, that's assuming there aren't any better ways to limit recruitment. Limited recruitment referred to those special jobs that required a limited number of people and had a certain threshold, but the pay was also much higher. This city was full of all kinds of strange rules. For example, all employment announcements were related to the administrative office instead of individuals. The officials would update the announcement once a week, and it could be for hundreds of people. Such a scale and efficiency could be said to have reshaped Good's understanding of the city. However, there was no lack of surprises here. Compared to the other inconceivable wonders, this was nothing. Basically, all the recruitment was divided into 3 categories. In addition to the limited recruitment, the other 2 categories were short-term recruitment and formal recruitment. The latter had a much broader pay and job scope. Unfortunately, it required either an ID card or a primary diploma. Immigrants like them could only choose short-term jobs to fill their stomachs. Sanko's choice was reasonable. Although the easy jobs did not have high pay, they could save energy to attend primary education classes. If they could pass the assessment, they could obtain the status of formal residents. What about you? Sanko looked at him. The pay is high, Good shrugged. It doesn't matter if I'm tired. Because he still had a mouth to feed. As a new refugee who had just moved to Neverwinter this winter, he was already very lucky to have a small house to shelter him from the wind and rain. As for moving into a beautiful residential area where he could have a meal of meat every week, he did not have such extravagant hopes for the time being. The only thing that made Good feel a little regretful was that the administrative office had set a minimum age limit, 16 years old. Rachel would have to work for another 2 years to meet the requirements. Now that he had finally escaped from the fire pit, he would not let her fall into it again. Don't overwork yourself, Baggy reminded him. It's freezing outside. It's not cheap to go to the hospital. Don't worry, I'm very healthy. Good patted his chest. He was not bragging. He had almost been selected as a squire of the night, if he had not been born in a poor family. Uncle, what are you going to do? I'm not going to choose anything. I'm just here to accompany you. Ah. Sanko was stunned. It was Good who reacted quickly. Have you already? That's it. Baggy laughed foolishly. The foreman of the 6th engineering team has taken a liking to me and plans to recruit me into the official team. The new contract should be sent to me in 2 days. That's really great. Sanko came to his senses. If you're officially recruited, your salary will almost double, right? Then you'll be able to save up the down payment and get an ID card. Then you'll become a real resident of Neverwinter. If you ask me to study again, I'm sure I won't be interested. Baggy waved his hand. Besides, I've been here for almost 2 years. I can only say that I'm too stupid to see an opportunity now. You're so young, so you'll definitely have more opportunities than me. Some people around them heard their conversation and came over to congratulate them. The road became lively for a while. This made Good a little puzzled. In his opinion, getting an ID card was just a way to get a better job, but these people seemed to be the opposite. It was not important to become a subject of a lord or king, but in their conversation, it seemed that it was a great thing to be proud of, even more important than the job itself. While chatting along the way, the 3 of them arrived at the square of Neverwinter. A group of people had already gathered here, but most of them were residents of the city and did not compete with the refugees in the temporary residential area. The new announcement was posted on the south side of the square. From time to time, a kid walked up to Good and the others and asked, "Do you need a substitute reader? It's only 10 copper royals." "No, we can read," Baggy replied with a smile. Of course, among the 3 of them, only Sanko could read, but he could not read all of them. Tisk, these guys. If they have the time, why don't they find a formal job? Good muttered in a low voice. The salary is much higher than these copper royals. They're all students of the academy. I guess they haven't reached the working age yet. Sanko looked around and said, "What?" "Well, I heard it when I was on the night shift." He lowered his voice. In order to prove the importance of knowledge, the teachers often encourage them to use what they've learned to find opportunities to make money. It seems that this practice has greatly increased the number of students in the academy. If I didn't have to work during the day, I'd like to try it. That works? Good glanced at the substitute readers who were running around. Most of them were children. If he remembered correctly, Rachel could read a little. Maybe she could do it? Hey, look over there. The uncle suddenly pointed to a corner at the south end of the square. A lot of people are gathering there. Good and Sanko looked at each other. Is it a limited recruitment? Come on, let's go and have a look. The three of them immediately ran to the place where the crowd gathered. To their surprise, there was not only a tent, but also a narrator. After listening to the narrator, Good could not help but feel happy. There was indeed a limited recruitment here, and the conditions were very lenient. They did not need to be literate, nor did they need an ID card. The only requirement was that they had to be physically fit and pass a series of relevant tests. Although he did not understand what those strange tests meant, as long as it was a competition of physical fitness, he was confident. Chapter 1051. There was a hubbub in the crowd. The army had always only chosen official residents, and the conditions were getting stricter and stricter. It was only during the battle for the throne that everyone was recruited. Why did it suddenly open today? Even Good, a new immigrant, had heard the uncle mention how generous the army was. As long as he joined the first army, he would not have to worry about food and clothing for the rest of his life. Not only would he be provided with food and clothing, but he would also receive a pension after his death. His family would also benefit. Moreover, they would not only eat oatmeal and pancakes, but also fish fillets, jerky, and butter, which were all common and unlimited. Apart from the possibility of losing his life, it was almost a perfect job. No, it was a perfect job. If he could exchange it for so much, how much was his life worth? Good had been exiled from the kingdom of Wolfheart to Grey Castle and had seen too much suffering and disaster. Groups of people had died by the roadside like animals, and crows had danced merrily on them, enjoying the feast. Sometimes, life was not much better than grass. Moreover, the Church of Hermes, which had conquered most of the kingdom of Wolfheart, had been defeated by the king of Grey Castle. Joining this powerful and mysterious army might be safer than being a squire of the night. It was also good to join the second army. Although the conditions were not as good, and he might be sent to other cities, it was safer, and he had never heard of any losses. In other words, if he could be selected by the army, no matter which army he was assigned to, it could be regarded as the best way out for outsiders like him. Good and Sanko were both excited. They looked at Baggy and said, "Uncle." Baggy also seemed a little hesitant. After thinking for a while, he said with a wry smile, "I'd better not go. The foreman must have spent a lot of effort to hire me. I can't break this agreement first. It's just the registration. It's not certain whether you'll be accepted or not," Sanko advised. "You can wait for the results before making a decision." "I'm afraid I won't be able to refuse by then." Baggy shook his head. "You go ahead. I'll wait for your good news in the square." Sanko wanted to say something, but Gudra grabbed his shoulder and said, "Line up." He looked back and finally nodded. "Then let's go apply first." Since many of the applicants were illiterate, the scene was a little chaotic. After registering, he was taken aside by the black-clothed guards and separated from the crowd. At the same time, more and more residents came to apply for the recruitment. The announcer had to close the registration channel and loudly announced that the recruitment would continue the next day. Even so, the crowd did not disperse for a long time. Many people stood around the tent and seemed to want to see what kind of assessment was. Good could not help but rejoice that he had not arrived too late today. On the other side, some people had already entered the tent under the guidance of the guards. He noticed that although this tent was close to 100 paces wide, enough to hold all the applicants, no more than 10 people entered at a time. This meant that the exam might be more complicated and difficult than he had imagined. Sure enough, not long after, a mournful scream came from the tent, causing the expressions of the applicants waiting outside to suddenly become serious. "This." Sanko shrank his neck. "Is it a test of how well they can take a beating? If he's being tortured, The screams should be continuous, Good said in a low voice. Such continuous screams suggest that he's suffering from some kind of shock. Is it? You know so much. Because I have no lack of experience in beating people up or being beaten up. He exhaled softly. I also heard it from others. After a while, the sound of vomiting came from the tent again. Everyone's face turned pale. What is the test this time? Good was speechless. It would be a miracle if he could guess it. When the first batch of candidates was brought out, his heart skipped a beat. Only 1 out of 10 people stayed in the tent. Did that mean the elimination rate was as high as 90%? And why were their footsteps so weak? It was as if they couldn't even stand stably. At least, judging from their figures, these people shouldn't be too weak. But he had no time to think about why. The guard called his name. Good. Sir. Good clenched his fists and strode into the tent. The space inside was not large, and it seemed to be divided into several areas by the curtain. According to the order of entry, the group of people sat down in front of a man in a military uniform. But the bench was a little strange. One had to stand on tiptoe to sit on it, and it was very shaky, as if it was deliberately making people uncomfortable. What made him feel a little relieved was that Sanko was also in this team. I am the examiner of this project, the man in the military uniform said. You don't need to know my name, because most of you will be eliminated soon. Even if you pass all the tests, you will just take the first step. If you want to join the army, you still have a lot to learn. So, is he selecting the second army? Or a reserve army that is newer than the second army? Good thought. But no matter what it was, as long as the pay could make him and Rachel better, he had to give it a try. Now I will announce the rules, the man continued. Everyone put your feet on the pedal and keep it there for 5 minutes. No matter what you see, don't fall off the stool. Of course, if your feet touch the ground, you will fail. Then get ready to start. Everyone could not help but look at each other. That's it. The officer sneered and did not answer. Instead, he closed the curtain around them. Then a strange white light swallowed Good. When he came to himself, he found that he was floating in the air. Suddenly, he heard a scream, and at the same time, there was a dull sound of something hitting the ground. This caused a lot of panic. Even Good subconsciously wanted to move his hands and feet, trying to escape the fate of being smashed to pieces. But the slight shaking under his body made him instantly wake up. He was still sitting on the stool. But the worst was yet to come. He did not float for long. Soon the surrounding clouds began to rise, which meant that he was falling. The feeling of falling to the ground at high speed was almost indescribable. Good felt his heart almost jump out of his throat. His brain was warning him of extreme danger, but his reason was telling him that there was an invisible stool under his butt. Under the impact of the two contradictory thoughts, the last thing that appeared in his mind was Rachel's face. After the white light dissipated, the scene in the tent returned to his sight. Not bad. The officer clapped his hands. You have passed the first test, and your results are much better than the previous group. But there are still a few more tests. I hope you can persist until the end. This is the first test? Good swallowed and found that his hands were trembling violently. His back was cold, as if he had just climbed out of the water. Damn it. That was not the end of the fall. After that, his vision climbed and dived several times, and he even skimmed over the steep rock walls along the mountain ridges, as if he could hit the mountain rocks at any time. Simple? He could not help but think of the officer's sneer. No, it was already a blessing from God that he could still sit in his original position. Chapter 1052. Did he fall to the ground out of fear, or was he knocked down by someone? If he did not know which direction to go, it was possible for him to knock someone down in a panic. After all, everyone's position was not scattered, and it took a bit of luck to persist until the end. Good did not know whether to feel lucky or disappointed. It was true that the fewer the competitors, the higher the chance. However, he had to face the next test alone. Before he could think too much, The officer had already brought the qualified candidates to another compartment. The second test field was also not big. There were still 10 chairs placed in the middle, but this time, the chairs were in a different form. They were arranged in a circle and fixed to a large iron ring. There was a bracket under the iron ring, which seemed to be able to rotate freely. "Sit down according to the order," the examiner said expressionlessly. "The rules of the second round are similar to the previous round. Sit firmly and persist until the end." This time, no one dared to say it was easy. Everyone carefully climbed onto the iron ring and sat down according to their number. With the start of the test, 2 soldiers who had been guarding the place in advance came forward and held the handles on the back of the chairs to push the ring. As Good had expected, the ring slowly rotated with the chairs. At first, no one reacted. However, as the speed increased, a sense of discomfort quickly welled up in them. However, the soldiers had no intention of stopping. Instead, under the command of the officer, they pushed the ring even harder. For a moment, only the creaking sound of the chairs could be heard in the tent. Good's vision became increasingly blurred. The world was spinning. That was the only feeling left in his mind. He had not fully recovered from the effects of the illusion in the first round. The strong dizziness made his stomach churn, and the acid almost rushed to the root of his tongue. What kind of test is this? Are all the soldiers recruited by the army monsters? He gritted his teeth and tried to look at the soldiers who were pushing the iron ring, but he found that they were deliberately looking at the ceiling, trying to avoid looking directly at the iron ring. They were just repeating simple movements with their hands, and they were not affected by the rotation. This is not fair. He shouted in his heart. And that person only said to persist until the end, but not the specific time. If he had to rotate for an hour, he was afraid that he would faint in the chair. The act of focusing his eyes intensified the dizziness in his head. Good could no longer suppress the acid in his stomach. He opened his mouth and directly spat it out. Wretch! The sour stench immediately rushed into his nostrils. Like a chain reaction, his vomiting caused the others to vomit as well. The smell in the tent became extremely horrible, and there were even some splashes of juice and half-digested matter stuck to his face. I can't do it anymore. Ugh, I can't take it anymore. Good finally knew why he had heard the sounds of vomiting outside the tent. Isn't this a bit too much? More importantly, what's the point of this test? Was this really a recruitment for the army, and not a deliberate trick on them? Every breath was so difficult that he felt that he might give up at any time. But even when the iron ring finally stopped, he did not loosen his grip on the back of the chair. There were 3 participants left. A rare look of approval appeared on the officer's face. Well done. You're one step closer to passing. Rest for 5 minutes. From the 3rd round onwards, the difficulty will gradually decrease. You just have to deal with it seriously. But now, no one would believe the officer's words. Everyone acted as if they were facing a formidable enemy. After wiping their faces with their sleeves, they walked into the next compartment with sullen faces. But this time, Good found that the officer was not lying. The 3rd test was to crawl into a hollow ring and roll it from one end of the tent to the other. No one was eliminated. The 4th test was to flip through a set of strange pictures. The pictures were filled with similar color blocks, and they had to point out the animal patterns hidden in them. Again, all of them passed. The doubts in Good's heart grew stronger. The 5th test was to strip naked for a full-body examination. The 6th test was to point out the direction of an arrow on a piece of glowing glass. Even though everyone's performance was different, the result was still a pass. Just as he was waiting for the next test, the officer brought the 3 of them out of the tent. Only then did Good realize that there was another small tent at the back door of the main tent. Black uniformed guards surrounded the area, as if there was someone important inside. Sir, someone could not help but ask. The officer raised the corner of his mouth. I forgot to congratulate you. The test is over. You've passed the preliminary selection. Just wait here. Someone will take care of you later. Is this just the preliminary selection? Then the salary stated in the announcement. Good suddenly stopped halfway through his question. Oh no, The army would definitely not welcome people who only came for the salary, just like the knight who always talked about honor. If he said it in such a hurry, the officer would probably think that he was a greedy person. However, the officer did not show any displeasure. Instead, he looked at him seriously and asked, "Do you need the money?" It's nothing. After all, everyone in Neverwinter knows that the First Army's salary is high. In fact, I joined the army because of this. The officer shrugged and said, "The answer is yes." The education allowance, living allowance, and salary stated in the announcement will be paid truthfully. The subsequent screening will determine how far you can go, and it will not be used as an excuse to deduct your pay. As I said before, if you want to truly become a member of the army, you still have a lot to learn. Good suddenly felt a great sense of happiness. He was selected? The salary that was higher than Uncle Baggy's and the allowance that was enough to support him and Rachel had all become a reality? In an instant, the suffering he had suffered in the tent was nothing. When he recalled it, he even felt a trace of sweetness. Thank you, sir." He bowed excitedly and said, "I'll strive to join the First Army as soon as possible." The other two were also excited, and they mimicked him and bent down. But there's one more thing I want to tell you. Indeed, many people came to the army with the idea of high salary, but it's not the salary that makes them stay. The officer smiled indifferently. There are more things worth pursuing here. When the time comes, you'll find that the initial desire is not worth mentioning at all. He paused for a moment, as if remembering something worthy of nostalgia. Well, there are still many people waiting for the assessment. Let's talk later if there's a chance. It turned out that the officer was not a cold and reticent person. Good's heart skipped a beat. "Sir, since we've passed the assessment, can you tell us your name now?" "My name is Van." After saying this, the officer turned around and walked into the tent. After that, qualified people came out of the tent one after another and joined the waiting line. The recruitment did not come to an end until the afternoon. Good counted and found that a total of 16 reserve soldiers had been selected on this day. The guards crowded around them, sandwiched them in the middle, and entered the last tent together. The furnishings inside were very simple. There was nothing but a long table, but the guards seemed a little nervous. Good felt that the people around him were breathing faster. "These are the knight candidates they selected?" The tall man standing beside the table looked at them with interest, his eyes full of scrutiny. Good's heart suddenly trembled. What did he say? Did the First Army want to recruit a knight? How could this be possible? That was a title that only the children of the nobility could have. With his identity, he could not even be selected as a squire. "Empty knight? I know it's my brother's idea." Then a gentle female voice came into his ears. "But they're still far from this step. Let's take it slow. By the way, all of you go to the side and leave the space in the middle to them." "But..." The leading guard hesitated. "It's okay. I have someone behind me to protect me." "Yes, Your Highness." Highness." Before Good could figure out what was going on, the figure in front of him flashed, and an astonishingly beautiful woman came into view. She had a pair of eyes as bright as gemstones, and her face was more flawless than snow. Just one look at her would be unforgettable. If he could, he almost wanted to stare at her forever. But he quickly forced himself to look away and respectfully lowered his head. The woman's long and graceful gray hair revealed her identity. Even a new immigrant like him knew what hair color represented. It was the symbol of the royal family of Grey Castle. In Neverwinter, there was only one woman with such a bloodline. It was His Majesty's sister, Tilly Wimbledon. "Your Highness." Chapter 1053. "Get up," Tilly said calmly. "I know you must be full of doubts right now. Why did the army make an exception to recruit non-official residents? Why did the screening criteria are so strange? And why did I have to explain it to you? In fact, these questions sound complicated, but once you experience it, you will find it very simple. So I won't go into detail here. I'll just mention a few points. First of all, you will not be joining the first army or the second army, but a new army that my brother intends to build. It will be different from any other army, so the screening criteria will be more special. This caused a small commotion. There was no doubt that the new army would have a wider path of promotion and would be less likely to be ostracized. For people like them who did not have the slightest foundation, being able to develop in a brand new army was obviously the best choice. Even a fool would be able to understand this. But you can only be regarded as reserve personnel now, the princess continued. The princess continued, it's because it's so different that I don't have anything to refer to. This means that I have to start from scratch, and the difficulties I'll encounter will be beyond imagination. If you have to compare it, the difficulty of your previous assessment is not worth mentioning. Now there are 16 people standing here, but I'm afraid only 1 or 2 can become an empty knight or none. Good could not help but gasp. He was not surprised by how difficult it was, but by the first half of the princess's sentence. It really is a knight. Although he did not know the difference between an empty knight and a traditional knight, it was incredible that an ordinary person from a poor family could get this opportunity. As for extremely difficult, isn't that reasonable? He felt his heart suddenly burning. But what shocked him even more was, in addition, because in this city, no, in this world, only my brother and I really understand what the new army is, and Roland can't be distracted too much, I will be responsible for teaching you. This sentence was like a thunderbolt, and Good was stunned. Her Highness will teach them personally? In other words, they will have the opportunity to become a knight conferred by the Princess of Grey Castle? Even if they did not have a fief and were no longer nobles, it was still a great honor, especially for new immigrants like him who had nothing. The others weren't any calmer either. If they were not afraid of being rude in front of the emperor and making the princess annoyed, they would have already cheered out loud. The rapid breathing around him was the best proof of this. The training of all qualified candidates will be concentrated in New Shallow Beach. You will receive new residences and official identities, and henceforth become a part of the new king's city. Tilly pressed her hand down. But remember, even if you're a reserve, you're still part of the army. Your movements will be restricted. If you withdraw halfway, you will be regarded as a deserter. Any action that violates military orders will be severely punished. Do you understand? Your Highness. Even though they were a little absent-minded by the princess's stern warning, so much so that their replies were not loud and clear, no one showed any signs of regret. Very good. Lastly, it's time to swear an oath to the King of Grey Castle. Tilly looked at the tall man at the table. Vader. The latter put his hand on his chest and nodded. Then, he took out a roll of white paper from his pocket and spread it open. Now, I will read one sentence, and all of you will read after me. The content of the oath was simple and easy to understand. It was even too straightforward. For example, this sentence, I have no ill intentions towards His Majesty, nor do I have any hostility towards witches. Who would dare? Remembering that Her Royal Highness was also a witch, Good unconsciously raised his voice to the maximum, as if he could not show his loyalty if he lowered his voice even a little. After the oath, the guards came forward and distributed the packages to them. From this moment on, you're a member of the army. Tilly smiled. The first round of recruitment is expected to last about a week, and then the training will officially begin. The contents in the packages are what you need to learn and master first. When Good returned to the central square, the sky was already dark. The people who came to recruit had already dispersed, and the uncle and Sanko were nowhere to be seen. This was expected. No one had expected the assessment to take so long. They still had to take care of their families, so it was impossible for them to stay in the square all the time. At this moment, he could not care too much. He held the packages tightly in his arms and ran to the temporary residential area as fast as he could. Joy reverberated in his heart, and his body seemed to be filled with endless strength. Even if the cold wind blew against his face, he could not feel a trace of cold. The snow under his feet made splashing sounds, and the road, which had been trampled by thousands of people, was like a dark brown road sign. Perhaps it would be covered by snow tomorrow, but now it was pointing the way home. He went into the low and warm mud house, where Rachel was cooking oatmeal. Sorry. I came back late today. I know, the girl interrupted crisply. The uncle next door told me that you found a good job, right? Before he could answer, the girl had already reached out her right hand to him. Where's the delicious food? What? Hey, you said you'd bring me egg pancakes? Rachel pouted discontentedly. Damn it, I actually forgot about it. Good quickly added, next time you can eat one every week. Two? Rachel was doubtful. Really? Of course, it's not an ordinary job. I even met Her Highness. Good took off his wet shoes, rolled up half of his trousers, and moved closer to the stove. Then he carefully took out the package from his pocket. Look, this is what she gave me. What's in it? For a moment, the girl's curiosity overwhelmed her dissatisfaction for missing their appointment. I don't know. Let's open it and see. Good untied the tie and could not help but be slightly stunned. This is books? Rachel answered. He took out all the things inside and found that it was a stack of books. The covers were printed with different pictures, which looked very beautiful, but he could not understand a single word. Can you help me see what they are? At this time, he could only ask Rachel for help. The girl smiled proudly. I can't guarantee that I can recognize all of them. Well, this one is reading and writing. Skills, that one is common. Vocabulary, shorthand, the third one is. So these are the things that Senko learned. The pictures on the covers turned out to be another summary of the content. For example, there was a goose feather pen printed on reading and writing skills, and there were three-dimensional letters of all sizes on vocabulary shorthand. For some reason, Good was slightly disappointed. He had thought that the books would contain rewards from Her Highness to those who passed the test. They did not need to be very expensive. Even if it was just a scroll, it would at least be a symbol of honor. If it were someone else, he would probably start to laugh at him for daydreaming. How could Her Highness give him such elementary education textbooks that could be found everywhere? However, Good quickly recovered. Since he wanted to become a knight, he naturally could not be illiterate. He really had a lot to learn. At this moment, the cover of a book attracted Good's attention. He had never seen the thing in the picture before. It looked like a huge kite, but also like a big bird spreading its wings. It had 4 pairs of wings and was many times larger than a human. The woman sitting on it and controlling it looked very much like Her Royal Highness. The ocean shimmered beneath her feet, and the continent that should have been vast and boundless had become a corner of the world. This view was exactly the same as what he had seen in the first round of the assessment. Good felt that his breathing slowed down for a moment. Rachel, what's written in this book? You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.